Okay. Okay. Well, welcome to the November 17th LPEA board meeting. Thank you very much for joining us today. We appreciate your participation. And as we have for the last few meetings, we're going to take a moment. We're going to begin this. We're going to begin this meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. So wherever you are, if you don't mind standing. Terrific. Okay, thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Terrific. Thank you. So we also, before we get going with today's agenda, I think we want to take a moment of silence on behalf of Brandy Fassett, who unfortunately we lost since the last board meeting. And so if everybody wouldn't mind to just bow your head and take a moment of silence. She will be missed from this earth and this community. Okay, thank you. Okay, onward. So the first object is, of course, to call the meeting to order, and we're going to need a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved, Bob.
Thank you.
Seconds.
Terrific. All in favor, hand up, say aye. All opposed?
Aye.
Thank you. Any abstain?
I do have a question, John.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
The question I have is there a reason why we don't put the financials along with the financial report together on the agenda? Seems like when we get to those two things, we're bouncing back and forth. And maybe you'd consider putting those together at the same spot. Thank you.
That is a good idea. Why don't we look to rearrange the next board meeting to structure that rather than going through the exercise of juggling it on the fly now? But I actually think that's an excellent
and that's great.
suggestion.
Thank you.
Terrific. Okay, so I'm sorry. So we got that approval. Yes. Okay, good. All right, so let's open up the floor for member comments. As a reminder to all of the member participants, your comments are absolutely welcome. We're glad you're here. We're glad you're participating. We have a 5-minute limit for all comments, and we ask that you respect that 5 minutes as best you can. So with that, we will. Hillary, are you going to run the comment section? No. Who is?
Not usually for these. I
don't know why I thought it was you. All right, who's doing it?
I'll do it, John. It's Janelle.
Thank you, Janelle.
You're welcome. Okay, looks like John's our first one.
Hello. I have a couple questions. One is the RFP that Crossover Energy responded to. How many of the board members have read that RFP?
I think, John, and correct me if I'm wrong, Graham, we don't actually, this is an opportunity for member comments. We generally don't engage in this forum for a dialogue.
Yeah, I think this is typically comments and then questions we can sort of have referred. We got a few options for question referral. typically going directly through your constituent director, and then they report those onto the board. And then also we have a sort of direct file question through policy 363, I believe. Let me verify that number.
Terrific. So to address your question directly, John, I think if you want that question answered formally, I think that's the process we're going to follow rather than asking people to respond to that on the fly.
Okay, so I guess my comment would be, not only can members not see the RFP, but I've talked to several board members who haven't seen the RFP. So it's kind of stunning to me that at some point they're going to have to vote on this, yet the board members don't seem to be familiar with what the actual requirements are. And that's incredibly disappointing to me. The number 2 comment would be about Next Gen Co-op Alliance. I'm still having a very difficult time understanding how that's beneficial to the members and getting any solid information on where that's registered. Is it a nonprofit? How is it financed? What are its policies and bylaws? And again, it's really hard to understand how our CEO, being chair of that organization, is beneficial to the members. And I think it's a distraction from primary responsibility to LPEA. But I guess, yes, another forum for the questions. Thank you. I think that's really inappropriate that at the start of the meeting, we can only make comments and we can't ask a simple basic question. Thank you.
You're muted, John.
Okay. Thank you.
I did not really fully hear his comment because it was garbled. So I don't know if anyone else had that difficulty.
I could hear him. Anybody else having audio trouble this morning?
All right, well, I'll catch up later, I guess.
Okay. Okay. Terrific. Well, thank you for that comment. Do we have anybody else for public comment?
I don't see anyone else, John.
Okay. Let's give them another 10 or 20 seconds here. Okay. All right. Terrific. All right, well, let's move on then.
Sorry, you have a question from Kirsten, I thought.
Okay.
I did. I'm sorry, you have to put your hand up to make little quips. So my quip was that the reason you thought Hillary was going to be taking questions is she did such a great job doing the questions at the annual meeting and at the power stuff. That's why you thought she was taking them.
There you have it, the truth of it. Great, thank you. Yeah, and thank you for everybody who did all those town hall meetings. I got multiple people giving me feedback, said they were terrific, and a big success all around. So appreciate the hard work. Those things are time consuming and hard work, but definitely time well spent. And so thank you for everybody who did that. Okay, let's move on. So item 3, the consent board items. So as we've done in the past, we're going to vote to approve all of these items in a block. However, any board member has the right to simply request that any of the items be extracted and voted on separately. So if anybody would like to make that request, this would be the moment to do that. Kohler, go ahead.
I just moved to approve the consent board items.
Terrific.
Second. Ted.
Ted, second. Terrific. Discussion. Okay, all in favor, hold your hand up, say aye.
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 Thank you. All opposed? All abstained? Okay, the motion carries. Thank you for doing that. So we will now go on to the item 4, which is the CEO and staff reports and the division dashboard. So I think we'll hand the mic to you, Jessica.
Great. I am going to share my screen. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay, great. So little fun on Halloween, we had some employees dress up, which was a good time. We always have an annual picture. I will go on to the next page, which is key performance indicators. So we have all green checks. John, did you want me to pause for questions on this one? Or did you want to have me go through this first?
I think you can go. I think you can take it straight through, and then let's do questions
Okay.
at the end, and then back it up if we have to get into any of the issues. Oh, wait, hang on. Kirsten, go ahead.
This is going to sound like a repeat of a song about the equity percentage. I get that it's good or it's okay that we're at 52.48, but then I wonder if we at the Finance Committee need to think about changing our range of what is good, because now we're looking at something that's out of range, but it's still good. So I don't want us to get used to seeing a green check mark and thinking, oh, that means it's in range, because in this case, it doesn't. So I'm just pointing that out. I'm broken record. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. John, you had a comment? Go ahead, please.
I wanted to support that. You know, it should at least get our attention when it's outside of the norms and be a yellow check mark. We can all say very well it's exceeding it or minimally missing it, but if we have a top and bottom and it's outside of that, it should be indicated as such.
Fair enough. I think
So
that's good.
John, can I have Carl respond to that? Because Kirsten asked that in the email and I thought that was helpful, and I thought his answer was helpful. So if he could respond to that, that would be great.
Yeah, go ahead. Sounds great.
Everyone hear me okay? Excellent, thank you. Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying. I think we talked in the Finance and Audit Committee about reviewing the goals this year, and I intend to propose 45 to 55 being a better range. But right now, the reason that we went over the 50 was because of the improved margins this year, which were mainly driven by cost cutting. So if we were over 50 and it was a result of us not retiring our capital credits, then I think that's a problem, a very big problem. But we retired $5.5 million this year, which is the most we've retired in over 20 years. So I completely understand that it's not in the range. I just feel it's kind of counterintuitive to put a cross by it when it's driven by, something that's positive. But I do understand, and I think that's certainly one of the financial goals we need to address in the coming year.
Fair enough. I think the essential feedback was just simply to, even in that case, at the very least, let's footnote something like that on a go-forward basis, or flag it in some way so that there's visibility there, rather than having it be a. Go ahead, please, Kirsten.
Yeah, I agree. We need to change the range, because we use this actually several times in this presentation, including in the budget for next year. We say that we're going for this. We're going for 52.48. So it's not just this year we did it because whatever. We see it later on in the budget package itself. So I would like to make sure that we change our range, because if we give you wrong ranges, then you can't succeed.
Agreed. Okay. So if I'm sorry, I just want to make sure that I'm not rushing ahead. Is there I understand the request, Kirsten, and the observation that we probably need to update our objectives, which would go back down, I believe, to the fact, or certainly not discussed at this stage of the agenda. Did you have is there more there baked into what your comments?
No, sir. Sending it to the FAC is the right place, and we're reviewing all the goals anyway, so it totally makes sense.
Terrific. Okay, thank you. Go ahead, John Lee.
So Carl's detail in the email was, very matter of fact, and so is this column. A yellow exclamation mark indicates monitoring performance, and if it's marked yellow, it says we're aware of it, that it's outside of these norms. We don't have to wait for it to get voted on to 55%. It's simply not within those margins or within those percentages, and we can rejoice in that. That's a good thing, but it should be indicated appropriately. And I think to Kirsten's comment on email, let's trust the numbers and the marks that are going to be listed on the side of the status.
Agreed. I think that was the key takeaway here, which is on a go-forward basis, even if it's outside the band to the positive, it should be noted either in the status or at the very least flagged for discussion. And then the second key takeaway was that if there's not a key, if in this particular example, maybe on a go-forward basis, there should be no upper bound, that's fine. But we'll need to do that in the FAC and reset the objectives there. Agreed. Did that summarize the matter for everybody? Terrific. Okay. All right, Jessica, back to you.
Great, thank you. That's very helpful. So we will make those changes. Okay, we're gonna move on to October highlights. This is one slide that I'm gonna spend a little more time on because I think, as everybody knows, the Colorado cases of COVID are skyrocketing. So this is the most amount of COVID cases we have had at the utility in 1 month, and that's 5, and this was last month. All of those cases are recovered and back to work, so that's great. To our knowledge, no one has ever been hospitalized out of our employees, and there are no fatalities, no COVID deaths at La Plata Electric. We've never had more than 5 cases in 1 month. So in talking to the rest of the co-ops across the state, we had a call last week. Sounds like everybody is averaging about 5 to 8 in the state of Colorado. So we did decide to send folks home. We've been working with San Juan Basin Health Alliance. We've been very close with them, monitoring the OSHA rule, which is now a federal stay. So we are not even allowed to implement that. We need to pause to see what the courts are going to decide. But in the meantime, to keep our employees safe, we've changed some of the crew so that they're not coming into the office. They have their meetings outside to keep them separate and safe, and then also obviously employees. So our offices are still open, the front lobby. So we still do have some employees that have to come into the office, but we're really trying to stagger them and keep them apart to keep them safe. Okay. I would just say the other theme you're going to see through this, I'm not going to go through all of these like I did previously, is that most of the discussion is around working on the buy down payment with Tri-State. We're still actively working on that. September was a big month for that, I think, as all of you are aware. So that was really excellent work from staff in partnering with Tri-State on the specifics of the buy down payment, and now working with them to produce settlement documents to FERC, which we'll describe in more detail when Matt Larson gets on the phone at 12:30. I think the other great thing is that, and Jerry, remind me, when was the last time we had crews go to the Lyman Rodeo?
The international, the last time, I believe, was 1996.
So this is a really great opportunity for linemen to go to the rodeos, to meet other linemen, share information. It's a great morale builder because what Jerry does and Garrett is they bring the crews together and they have competitions on safety. And so this is pull top rescue, which is an extremely important safety mechanism for saving a lineman up on a pole. So one thing we're going to try to do in the spring is Jerry and I are talking with Garrett, and we're going to host a kind of just a mini pull top rescue and invite the board to come watch that. It's pretty phenomenal to watch these guys and what they do. So it's really exciting to send this crew to the International Lineman Rodeo, and they learned a ton, lots of friendships, brought those back to La Plata and the techniques, because different techniques work. So it was extremely helpful. So that was great. And I think most of this, again, is crossover negotiations, virtual annual meetings, town hall. We were very, very busy this month. Budget completion. On the Durango e-bus, I'll just pause on this one for a minute. You should all have a invitation now for December 16th. We are going to have a press event in the morning, and then we are going to meet in our parking lot. So more details are going to come from Hillary. I'm just making sure you all saw those invitations. And then we're going to take you on the bus and we're going to go to the Animas substation. And this is just the board and staff to go look at the Animas substation. Now we are going to have certain safety equipment that you all have to wear once you're inside the substation, because it is energized and there's pretty strict safety requirements like fire retardant gear. So we'll do different types of talks. We'll split the groups up. So that should be pretty exciting. So don't forget to RSVP, please. And Hillary is going to set out more details on when and where to be at these events, if you choose.
Do I have to bring a book bag?
Yes, you do. You have to be quiet on the bus.
Oh, no.
No spitballs, Tim.
So
Maybe
that,
we could get Dan to drive the bus.
yeah, well, I don't know who's driving the bus. Okay, so that actually completes it, John. So we are ready for questions.
Terrific, thank you. Let's go ahead and start with Kohler. Your hand was up first by moments.
Thank you. When you were talking about the COVID, I know at Tri-State is at a high risk status right now because they had a breakout at one of their meetings last month. But one thing that they mentioned, there's actually two different mandates. One of them is if you have over 100 employees. The other one was if you have any kind of a federal contract. And the federal contract one does not have any, what should I say, testing ability. You have to be vaccinated. And I know it was mentioned at our Tri-State meeting that some of the co-ops are concerned about this because they do have federal contracts as they're providing power to the Forest Service building or the federal judge or whatever. Are you having that same issue here, those same concerns? And after you answer that, I do have another question, please.
Yeah, Kohler, that's a great question. Actually, Graham, I'm going to have you answer that because Graham just sent us an updated email this morning as to why we're not subject to the federal contracting requirement.
Yeah, Kohler, so you're right. The executive order has instructed OSHA to come up with its rule for employers with over 100 employees, and then it had government contractors have to apply with the same vaccine mandate as government employees. And like you said, there is no test exemption for that. So the general rule on that was that if you have a contract that is subject to that is either up for renegotiation or up for an option or up for some sort of continuation, the government should present you with a contract that includes that clause in it. And the government hasn't done that to us. And based on the parameters of the contracts that would be covered by that, I had never suspected that we would be subject to that. But just today, I got information from the Electric Cooperative Bar Association that the General Services Administration of the federal government has said that general electric utility contracts that are under the simplified procedure amount, which is basically if you have less than a $250,000 utility bill, those are all exempt from this. So, and also if you look at the executive order itself, autonomous Native American tribes and other indigenous governments are exempted from this as well. So a contract that we have with the Southern Indian tribe itself is not considered a government contract under that executive order. That is a specific exemption. So the two main exemptions that we would fall into is I'm not aware of any individual contract we have with the government that's over $250,000. That's specifically exempted under the executive order as I've reviewed it. And also with the Native American tribal governments is exempted.
Thank you. That's a great update, and that helps it out. So my second question then is on page 39 and 158, and we talk about the virtual annual meeting, also the power supply town halls. And I was interested, I couldn't find it, maybe it's there, but do we have an idea how many people are viewing these in the archived recordings that are on the website?
Hillary, do you have that answer? Or maybe we can get back to you on the answer?
Yeah, I can get back to you. I don't
Okay,
have it off the
great.
top of my head.
Thanks.
Thank God, I appreciate that, because I have a lot of people asking me, and I don't know if they're going to watch it or not. So thank you.
Terrific, thank you. And just as a reminder to everybody, as Kohler just did, if you are talking about specific items in the agenda, try to call out the page number so that everybody can follow along. Okay, other questions or comments on this one? Terrific. Kirsten, go ahead, Kirsten.
Hey, John, I can't find the page section. Did we go through Hillary's section about all the Facebook hits and stuff yet?
Kirsten, this is part of the dashboard. Yeah. So if you have a question, we're happy to answer.
Cool. So we get that in our package, but you're not going through it here. Is that right?
That's typically correct. Yeah.
So
and I think that starts on page 48 of your packet, if that's what you're referring to.
Let's see. Anyway, there were two things. I wanted to acknowledge the Customer Service Week, and I'm sorry I missed it because the CSRs do a great job. The second one is it's a question for you, Hillary, and I don't know if it's possible. Every month I get my these are going to be your bills for your different accounts, and this is what you're going to pay. And when I got my October one, it was much less than I thought it was going to be. And I totally forgot that was because of the capital credits coming in. So I'm wondering on that email, is there any way to link the two systems, the capital credit system and the billing system, to say, and of this, half of this bill was paid by, or this was paid by capital credits? Because I think that'd be a good reminder, at least for those who get emails, that because otherwise it just gets lost in the shuffle, and we just think we did a great job, and it was actually a capital credit thing.
Yeah, actually, very good timing on your question, Kirsten, because we have identified that our entire capital credit retirement process could use some upgrading and some refreshing. And so that is something that Carl's team and my team is going to be working on as one of our strategic objectives for next year. We would like to really make sure that those have high profile, that the bills and the messaging around it are linked, probably change the language around that to make it something that's a lot easier and clearer for people to understand. And so that is something that we have slated for 2022. But to answer your question right now, there is no way to link those because the bills go out through a different system than the alert emails go out through. So, but we will be looking to kind of streamline that next year.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Rachel, go ahead.
Yeah, I echo what Kristen was saying, and I guess I had a couple things. One was just following up on the media and comms front. Are we ever going to do like a little debrief or a quick run through of town hall meetings? Just because I know it'll get brought up again next year come September when we want to schedule them, but it might not be as fresh in the mind. And I think only, yeah, this is supposed to be just an opportunity for the board, I think, to get out there a little bit and to engage with our membership. So didn't know if we're going to have that conversation.
Just
You
to
mean
clarify.
like yeah, after action review kind of, is that what you were thinking, or?
Yes, I think that's the same thing as a debrief. It's just a casual, what went well, what would we change and do different, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't think we need to do in the full board meeting, probably not necessarily the space or place, but yeah, didn't know if that's possible.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. You know, I think our goal is that we'd like to have town halls every year, depending on topics. I think we saw that the community really enjoyed it. So I would just invite any board member to maybe have a conversation with Hillary and just reach out to her. And, you know, what worked well, what didn't work well, some ideas. I don't know if that works, Hillary, but I think that's a great idea. Perfect. Thanks for the suggestion, Rachel.
Great. Thank you. Holly, go ahead, please.
Great, thank you. I was just curious, I meant to follow up on this a couple of months ago when we had some photos of doing art demonstrations for kids, and I was just curious if it was ever done for Pagosa Fire. I know that they're in the middle of their state firefighter academy again, so maybe with COVID, we're putting that again on hiatus, but I know they were really excited to see us.
Yeah, good question. Jerry, do you know if they got to, I know we contacted them.
Yeah, we did have it scheduled this last spring, and with COVID and everything, it's just been pushed off. We can't seem to get big groups together yet, but it is still on the schedule.
You're on mute, John. I think you're having Rachel.
Today is clearly we're all going to struggle with tech today. Rachel, you're up.
Awesome. First, I love Jerry's artwork on his wall. It's like one of the best watercolor paintings I've seen. Second
From his
was,
kids.
yeah, it's so cute. Second was just looking at page 50 in the packet, prepare for the future section there on the right. There's some really good targets listed. Electric sales are 5% over 2020 levels, 125 more miles of fiber added to the network, et cetera, et cetera. And I know we chatted about this before, but when we go to like our super brief snapshot of how are we doing against our goals and targets, there's just, oh, now I can't find it. That's on page, maybe the first page. Yeah, key performance indicators on page 35. Yeah, on beneficial electrification or utility of the future, we just have that one EV sales metric. And I think someone brought this up before, and I saw in the notes y'all are having kind of the strategic leadership meetings. So maybe that's something to look at for next year. Are there any additional metrics on that utility of the future that you want to be tracking? Because I found myself just reading that, I was like, oh, how are we doing? I know we're not striving for 125 miles next year or this year, right? That was like a longer range target, but that could be a cool one and one I would love to be able to share out with members and things when they're asking.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, Rachel. I think because this full year has been working with KMU on scraping the data and really understanding what we have. The next phase for this year is really to start a couple pilots, and that's with the bus, and that's with the mobile home park, and then doing some metrics on shave peak loads. But also, to your point, maybe we can add some metrics in there about how we're meeting our beneficial electrification goal. right? With like how many electric heat pump rebates we're putting out there. That's another goal for this year, is to really understand and data collect all the rebates going out so that we can create metrics around all that work. So yeah, I think it's a great point. We'll look at what other metrics we think we can add that we can actually follow for this next year.
Yeah, and it seems like just one to throw out there, because it's within beneficial electrification, but it's kind of tucked in. There's more utility of the future, just given the community's engagement around broadband, and just tracking miles put in a fiber optic line or something like that.
Okay, we'll look into that.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. Joe, you're up.
A couple of questions on the 125 miles. Is that, throughout the system, or was it on one particular area that needed to be, like between Pagos and Bayfield or something? And then will that help, overall as we move towards extending fiber to, to homes and things like that with the future plans?
Dan, do you want to answer that? Yeah. Thanks.
Joe, the 125 miles was over the 5-year strategic plan, and it was getting fiber from the substations out to our critical infrastructure. And so I would say it was spread throughout the service territory with a focus on getting to our critical infrastructure. And then that is something that our consultants looked at and showed how that could be further leveraged to serve our membership. How many members were within a certain number of miles of this kind of deployment? So it's a a base that we're laying out there that can certainly be leveraged in the future.
Okay, and with that, 125 miles, sounds like it's a lot of the service territory. Does that get to most of the critical infrastructure, or is there another 20 miles to go?
Yeah, there's, we have over 4,000 miles of line. So there's a lot of power line out there. So this gets to our critical infrastructure that I'll say is phase 1. There's always going to be more that I would like to get to.
Okay. And is the bus being used now by the school district? I wasn't sure.
I don't know if they have it on routes yet. I'll follow up with Dominic on that and ask.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Tim, you're up.
Yeah, I appreciate Rachel bringing up the KPIs there in that report and suggesting a couple. And one that I think we should definitely consider for next year, and it might be a little bit difficult, but probably not more than the beneficial electrification, which is, one of our main strategic goal is to reduce our carbon footprint. Yet we don't have anything tracking that. I don't have any KPI that says where we are in relationship to that goal. And I think that's kind of necessary. Hopefully we could do something in that regard.
Yeah, Tim, I think that's a good suggestion. We'll look into how we can track that.
Thank
you. See if we can add that.
Great. Thank you. Holly, you're up.
Great, thank you. I was just curious what the status of the customer satisfaction survey and the cost of service study was, please.
Yeah, good question. So Hillary, do you want to talk about the customer service survey? Because we're still going through the data, but you want to talk about tri-state survey and how we're trying to merge the two?
Yeah, so there were 2 surveys that were done this year with our membership. We worked with Tri-State to make sure that they were not duplicative, so we didn't spam any of our members. They only received 1, if any, request to do a survey. The LPEA run one, where we hired NRECA, the research arm of NRECA, to do our biennial membership satisfaction survey, that is done. And I am working on compiling that into a PowerPoint and getting that ready to present to you all. But we wanted to wait because the tri-state also did a survey amongst their membership, and they asked a different series of questions, which are complementary to what we asked. So we thought it would be best to present sort of a combined view of both of those surveys together for you guys. They are now saying that they'll be able to get me data in December or January. So I'm targeting being able to present that to you all at the January board meeting.
Thanks, Hillary. And Holly, the next one was about the COSA. So Carl, I'll have you give the update on that one, please. Or Dan. Dan has his, sorry.
Sorry,
I want to answer.
I raised my hand. I'll let Carl cover the COSA. I was just going to say that Dominic said the school bus will be used in the next couple of weeks starting in the next couple of weeks on routes.
Thank you.
Yeah, on the COSA, Holly, the consultant has done the work. They have just come back with, I think it's 8 questions that I need to answer this week, just to kind of refine, make sure that their findings, really to nail it down in terms of they've done a revenue requirement and they need some more information on our budget for 2022 in regards to sales and where we envision the sales from each rate class coming. That's really the last thing we need to do. So Jessica and I were talking that I think we're going to be looking at presenting that to the FEC. Did we say January or February, Jessica? I don't recall. I don't know if we decided, but one or the other.
Yeah, I think sooner the better if we can get the information. Yes. We'll just have to look at the schedule, but definitely.
Yeah, I think December would be too tight, but I think January is definitely could be.
Okay.
Excellent. Rachel, go ahead.
And I guess just a follow up on that, because we're looking to approve our 2022 budget. And so if anything comes back from the COSA, I'm just thinking about the staggering of it all, we'll just revisit if there's any action recommended. Would that be something where we'd revisit our 2022 budget, or something we just kind of kick down the road a little bit?
Carl, do you want to answer that one?
So their preliminary finding is that the 2022 budget in terms of revenue requirement is just about right. So I don't foresee any changes. Where we may look at is 2023. If we can do some refinements between rate classes, I think that's where we may well be going.
Awesome. Thank you for that clarification.
Okay, and just to answer Kohler's question, because staff are awesome and already got me the answer. Looks like we've had 65 people watch the town hall meeting, the first one, and 53 people watch town hall 2. There you go.
We were taking bets on that, the number, and I think I'm closest on any of that. I guess he's the most optimistic of all.
Okay. Okay, any last remarks before we hand it off to Carl for finance? Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, this perhaps could be discussed at the FEC, but the potential of a partial contract taking effect in 2023, I wonder how the cost of service study would capture that potential. If that's a long answer that we should discuss at FEC, I'm okay with that too. So.
That's a pretty short answer, Tim. Our hope was that they would find our rates were about right and give us a really good baseline to then we can, if there's a big change, which obviously a partial requirements contract would be, we could apply that to the data that we've already got next year, assuming if we knew we were going to start in 2023, big if, then it would be fairly simple to then apply that to the data that we already had.
Okay. Maybe we should bring that up and have a little deeper dive at the FAC at some point. Because I have some questions, but I don't know if it's good to take the time here.
Okay. All right, moving on. Carl, the floor is yours.
Thanks, John. I will share my screen. We'll go through the PowerPoint real quick. So a quick look at our October financials. Before I start, I'm hoping that the addition that I made on the front page of the financials, people found that useful, which showed, what we call the bridge between budget and actual. It was, we had higher operating margins than budgeted this month rather, and this year, as we know. But this month, driven by, we have the rate reduction with Tri-State, we had some reductions in our operating costs, and we came out once again ahead of where we had thought we would be. So I'm going to keep that going. One of our aims is to just not add things for the sake of it, but to try and add things that make it simpler, and if you're pushed for time, to see what really happened this month and get it out there. So looking at our financial goals, I mean, we've had, a discussion already this morning that these do need to be looked at, and we know we're going to do that next year. Equity percentage, yeah, I've got the green check mark. We will revisit that, but we're at around 52.5%, which has been pretty consistent. So I had thought that would dip lower as we've retired $5.5 million of capital credits, but the increased margins this year has kind of offset that to a degree, so it hasn't really moved that much. So we will have to revisit that in 2022. You can see our nice bold red cross there. Cash reserves are not where behind the goal of 16 to 20%. Not a surprise to me at all. At the end of October, we make a fairly substantial payment to CFC for our long-term debt. That's a quarterly payment. So you may remember 3 months ago, I was probably telling you the exact same thing. And then we have the added wrinkle of the capital credit retirements. So cash is actually around 15.9% today. And that's with capital credit retirements going out the door. So that's hugely encouraging. So we can look at long-term debt being 74% of equity. So I know Kristen had some questions on this as it applies here and as it applies to the budget. So it is, the goal was for equity to be more than long-term debt. Now, what's the benefit of that? So equity doesn't cost you anything. I mean, there is an argument that it does, but that's a very difficult thing to, there is not a set interest payment on equity. So if we were to, you guys decided, well, I think we should retire $40 million in capital credits next year. Say we did that, we'd have to borrow to do it. I don't really think that's a good strategy, and that you would then increase your long-term debt. You would be putting yourself in danger of violating your debt covenants, especially the debt covenant for your debt service coverage. The higher the debt, the more interest you're paying, the more risk you are of violating debt covenant, the more interest is an expense. what we need to make sure we do is, I think the balance needs to be right in that we do retire capital credits to our members in a timely fashion and at the level that we can afford without borrowing. As we mentioned, we've retired more this year than we have at any time. I do like this one, so I'll do it again, this century. The fact the century is only 21 years old, I'll take advantage of that for the sake of hyperbole. So that would be my reason why I would like consistently to see long-term debt be less than equity. I like 75%, but that's just me being financially conservative as, you know, the finance guy. I think if it was 90, that's not a huge problem. So hopefully, Kirsten, does that answer your question on that one?
Yes, it sure does, and I don't know why this caught me in the budget when you kind of worded it a little differently, and I was like, I don't remember that. Pointed out that it's one of your bloody goals. So sorry about that. I have a follow-up question. You know what a lot of other co-ops do? Do any of them go upside down on this, or are we pretty much normal that everybody tries to keep their debt below their equity?
For a distribution co-op, it's pretty rare that you would. I don't have massive insight into every co-op. I know when we talked about it at the Colorado group, no one has more debt than equity at the moment. So the folks like DMEA who bought out, they did that off balance sheet, so they didn't, put their debt up a huge amount. Otherwise they would be, but they're not. So I think it would be very rare for a distribution co-op. For a G&T, I think that's perfectly normal. I'm pretty sure Tri-State's debt is more than their equity, but that's because it's so capital intensive that it's just a different business model.
Super. And then one more, if I may. When I think what caught me, it was because it said on page 72 or something, it said patronage capital, that ratio, and this here it says equity, and I get that. So does equity include plant? Do we have equity and
equity and patronage capital are the same thing. I shouldn't mix them up.
Okay. So what is our plant considered? That's equity, isn't it?
It's an asset. It's a fixed long-term asset.
It's the other side of the balance sheet.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, I am on the finance committee, and I'm still learning everything. Sorry, guys. All right.
Thanks, Kristen.
Think of a teeter-totter.
I'm sorry, Tim? Think of what?
Think of a teeter-totter.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Okay, asset, equity. Okay, got it. Thank you. Balance sheet.
Okay, so we look at some highlights. One that's starting to get very predictable. I'm kind of looking at some of the same things week in, month in, month out. The orange or yellow or whatever color you want to call it is we do not have the kilowatt hours that we had forecast, mainly, well, almost exclusively from the industrial rate class. Residential has remained very robust. November will be interesting. I think, having not lived here that long, I'm only on my second winter. It seems kind of mild, so I don't know what you guys think. I guess walking the dog this morning, it seemed kind of chilly, but I think I don't see November being a particularly strong sales month unless it gets very, very cold in the last week or two. But that'll be interesting to look at from our residential sales. But really, this October was more of the same. Residential sales were robust, in fact, over forecast. Small commercial was just a bit below, and industrial was significantly below. So gross margins are above forecast for the year. Combination of the main feature being the rate reduction from Tri-State, but also just the what you call sales mix in old-fashioned for profit accounting. That We are selling more of our residential load, which has a higher gross margin than we are of our industrial, which has a lower gross margin. And remember, that's gross margin, not, you know, operating or net margin, because the reason the residential class has a higher gross margin, but it does use up a lot more of our infrastructure, our customer service, and our administration. So its contribution to the bottom line margin per kilowatt hour should be the same as every other class. That's what the COSA is trying to, you know, reinforce and confirm, which so far it is. But as I mentioned, we have some things to clarify before we finalize that. So costs $2 million below budget for the year to date. We continues to happen. We had that substantial budget for professional fees that has not been fully utilized. That's a big chunk of that. There's a couple of other bits and pieces, mainly from earlier in the year, travel, training, those sort of things were not happening. And they're still very much limited. Most training is still being done online, although some folks are traveling a little. But right now, we're $3 million over forecast on operating margin. So that's obviously fairly substantial. So we'll be allocated. There'll be a very nice allocation to the members at the end of 2021. And that's all I have for October.
Terrific, thank you. Kirsten, go ahead.
Yes, sir. God, that slide just went away.
Can you
bring
pop
it
that
back
up? Yes, please.
Sure.
It was the gross margin thing. Thank you for using that term, gross margin. Frequently, when we talk about, and I have said this myself, and it's incorrect. I'll say, well, it's okay that we're down on our industrials because we don't make our margins there. But I need to use the term gross margin because otherwise it looks like we're subsidizing one class or another, and we're not, because the cost of service study says, hey, they are cheaper to service. And so that gross margin, and so we need to remember to say that, because I think we have all at one point or the other said, oh, we don't make our margins on the industrials. We don't make our gross margins on industrials.
Great.
And careful with that. Thank you so much for that.
Rachel?
Yeah, thanks. I think I'm doing this right. So can I reference your, oh no, it just got lost. The kind of more detailed spreadsheets that you have, or does that come later?
No, we can do that now.
And I just popped off of that. If anyone else has a question, maybe go, because I just lost my page. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm back. So on page 24, the statement of operations, I was just looking at that and thinking about one of the comments that was made in the town hall meeting about how our gross operating margins are perhaps too high, or there was a question or a challenge, right? And then I started thinking about it and was looking at the bottom lines of the sheet, you know, where we kind of get all of our patronage capital from Tri-State and some of the other groups, and that's budgeted for. And if I recall, didn't we, when we were looking at the rate changes, we were really consciously trying to move to a model where if we didn't get any Tri-State patronage, we could be self-sufficient. Is that correct? That we were trying to kind of move towards that, and that was part of our rate discussions and decisions?
Yeah, I think that is correct. I know in 2019, we recorded a very small operating margin. I think it was around $700,000. And the only reason we were able to allocate much of anything was because we got a fairly substantial allocation from Tri-State, somewhere in the 2.5–3 million mark. So we ended up being able to allocate $4 million to the members, but the vast majority of it was from, as you said, those allocations from the cooperatives that we are a member, of which we are a member. Let me get my English correct there. So yes, you're quite right. We wanted to move away from that Tri-State's allocation for 2020 was substantially less than it was for 2019. I envision that 2021's will be similar to 2020. I know Kohler has reported that their financials have bounced back significantly since some real struggles at the beginning of the year, but they're not at the level of 2019. They're similar to 2020. If we were to do, a partial, then obviously we would get allocated a lot less. Retirement would not be affected because that relates to years when you were a full member, but it's the allocation that appears on your income statement, and that could be very, very little in future years if we were a partial member. The one of the other three prongs is not being a member at all, then obviously you don't get anything. So we do need to be more reliant on our operating margin to get capital credits back to the members.
Awesome, thanks. So am I accurate that, if I'm ever sitting there over coffee with someone and we're going deep in the weeds and they're challenging rate changes, that's an accurate piece of the puzzle to share with them around decision making?
Absolutely, yes. It's a really useful one as well. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.
I don't know who was first. I've got Kohler, Joe, and Sue.
Yep. Go ahead,
Okay,
Kohler.
on page 23 of 158, the forecast revision, under the interest expense other, there's quite a difference between what was revised and the original. It went down. And I was just wondering what created that to go down, because I haven't seen really interest rates go down. Did we pay off something more than what we thought? And then I have one other comment when you answer that one, please.
Sure. So that interest is principally what we accrue on member deposits. So when a member has to pay a deposit for their electric service, we do accrue interest on it so we have to honor that we're holding $100, $1,000, whatever it is on their behalf. And, as if we were a bank, we say, okay, that has accrued so-and-so interest this month. What we did earlier this year, and I have to give credit to Jen Colombe and the billing team and Hillary's team, is they had a really good look at deposits and what was necessary and what was not. So where we had members that had, we revised these things so that members who didn't need to be paying such large deposits, and we had looking at our risk profile, we had members paying deposits that we felt inflated, and that was changed. So there are lower levels of deposits, so we don't have to accrue nearly as much interest as we had done previously.
Good, thank you. That helps quite a bit. Then in the last part of that same page, same form, the income loss from equity investments. I just wanted to point out that at the very right-hand column, it has 0% as far as a percentage, which is not correct.
Okay.
So maybe something's off on your spreadsheet. That also showed up that same way on the inside the budget packet. So just a heads up. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla. I will get that fixed. Appreciate it.
Terrific. Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, on page 25 of 158, the top line there, total utility plant in service. There's just, it's a pretty big change from last year, and I'm not sure what total utility plant actually means. So could you comment on that?
Well, utility plant is really everything that forms part of the electric system. So anything that we've added, and we're going to be looking at the construction work plan for 2022 later today, and that was a big number for 2021. It's a big number. It's really anything we add, a pole, a wire, substations, transformers. anything that will go into that number, and you will see that will always go up. But obviously you also get rid of things as they become obsolete. So it's not going to be a 1-for-1 of, you know, we bought $1 million worth of stuff, so it goes up $1 million. You will be, you know, the obsolete or, you know, stuff that needs repairing will be removed.
And so $5.3 million, is that the new substation? Is that a lot of different things, new trucks?
Yeah, numerous items. Yeah.
Okay.
I think Animus sub, most of that was in 2020, but some of that would have been in 2021. But really, you can't pinpoint one item there. It's a number of different things.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Sue, go ahead, please.
Right, thank you. Carl, back to Rachel's point and question about the capital credits. If we are anticipating considerably less from Tri-State over the next several years, if we do the partial buyout, perhaps we as the board and staff should be looking at retiring those capital credits on a more frequent basis. I think now we're at a 20-year.
Mm-hmm.
Would you see us moving that to maybe trying to do a 15?
The current plan, and obviously it all depends on having the cash available to do it, is to do another fairly sizable G&T retirement in 2022. And that would get us to, I think, 17 years. I think it's a good idea, especially as those allocations are going to reduce, that we do get to a nice cycle. The thing is, though, because that's a cash transaction, the retirements should continue, you know, irrespective of what our status is with Tri-State, other than if we're like completely gone. So that would be the point where you have to really think about what you're going to do next. Although I do, as I mentioned, the plan is to get to 17 years next year.
Okay. Kirsten?
Yeah, that 17 years makes a lot of sense because that'll be 2004 or 2005,
Yep.
which is what Tri-State is retiring to us. So having that in sync with their retirement, our retirement, makes a lot of sense to me.
Okay.
Sorry, that was a form of a question, but I could make it, Carl, in case you wanted to ask something. Is that correct, Carl?
Very much so, Kirsten. I very much agree. Thank you.
Terrific. Tim, go ahead.
Thank you. Carl, I noticed in the page 25 of 158, the accumulated provision for depreciation and amortization. I don't know, I recognize that changes, you know, tends to increase month by month and so forth, but it seems significantly more than at the same period last year, especially as against the total utility plant in service. And I just wonder is there some accelerated depreciation we've taken on, or is that just the typical straight line depreciation we've been using for a long time?
We haven't made any changes to depreciation policy. I would normally, I think, what's the budget for depreciation? Around 9 million. I think that's roughly where it is. What I would expect you to see in the accumulated depreciation is to go up a little less than that, because you knock off the depreciation on the things you get rid of. But yeah, we haven't changed any policy. Most electrical equipment is 30 years. Some is more, some is less, but 30 is pretty standard. So I think, yeah, I don't think there's anything that has changed. Well, I know we haven't changed anything. But if there's something, maybe that's something we can have a deeper dive on at the FAQ if it looks out of whack, Tim.
I don't know if it looks out of whack. It just seemed to be more than what the previous year, just slightly less total capital was. So anyway, yeah, we could look at it later. I was just curious if there was a change there because it could affect our budgeting, I think. One other question I had was, I might be sound like a broken record as well, but I look at line loss a lot in the performance statistics, or I look at it every month, and it just seems to keep creeping up this year. And I'm just curious, I know that's probably not you that can answer that, Carl, but maybe. I'm just curious what factors are in there, or is there any control we have in that regard? I mean, that's just lost money, in my opinion.
I can give a stab at that, and Dan, tell me if I'm making a pig's ear of it. I think the more of your sales, the more of your electric sales that are residential, the more that mix skews that way, the more line loss you will have, because industrials tend to take their load almost directly off a substation. Whereas obviously with homes, they have to go through the full distribution system down to, you know, the small wire that goes into your house. The bigger, the longer this is the real finance guy explaining electricity here, but the smaller the wire that you end up with, the more line loss you're going to get, because it's essentially going through more and more stages where there's the possibility of, you know, losing something. Dan, tell me what I said wrong.
No, I think you're very right on there, Carl. Tim, the other thing that we have going on is that we're getting more and more accurate on how we're actually calculating losses using the AMI data. It's a little tricky because we have a billing periods or multiple billing periods that we send bills to our customers. But when Tri-State sends us their bill, it's, you know, calendar month. And so we have to try to say, okay, what's unbilled, what was billed last month. And so we have to try to make them the same window to line things up. So part of this is actually just getting more accurate on how we're actually accruing the losses. And so that should be, you should start to see that stabilize more and more so right now. And then we are evaluating different ways of looking at that as we get more of that COPUC platform going. Jessica mentioned that this last year was mining data, stripping the data out and using that. And so I'm evaluating the possibility of actually using that to get that raw AMI data for a solid calendar month and comparing that to Tri-State, which might get us more accurate there.
Do you think a partial contract or the utilization of more local generation microgrids, I think, might help that?
I don't expect it to. Actually, we had this conversation with Jessica yesterday. Our losses are calculated at the point of delivery and then what we deliver to our members. So anything upstream of where it's delivered to us is not included in our losses. So to the point that we have generation inside our system, yes, that could possibly help, but the losses are very, very low on the transmission system itself. It's the distribution system, it's the transformers that really add to the losses. And that wouldn't really change that much. Where those change are when we have major system improvements, upgrading miles and miles of a line from a small conductor to a larger conductor.
All right, thank you for being patient with me.
And just one more point on that. La Plata's, just so you give you some comparison on that, most utilities are probably sitting 6 to 7% losses. And so ours being in that 4% range is really quite low. A large part of that, as Carl mentioned, is attributed to our transmission, our sales to industrial customers that take service right off the transmission line.
All right, very helpful. Thank you very much.
Terrific. Okay, just we'll keep going here with more questions. Just as a time check, we are almost 20 minutes over the calendar agenda, but let's get the good questions answered as needed. So, Kirsten, you're up.
Yeah, follow up on line loss. Do we also include the electricity for the offices in the line loss?
Yeah, it goes part of the calculation. It's called own use. And so the way you calculate loss, it's what we purchase, or it's what we sell. It's the difference between what we sell and use ourselves and what we purchase.
So we're in that. Our lighting, our lights at our headquarters and at Pagosa is in that. Do we have a sense of what percentage that is?
It's not part of the losses. I mean, it's part of the loss calculation where we include our usage with the sales to our members. And then what we call losses is what's not us, what's not sales to members versus what we purchase from Tri-State. So we do own use is on the statistical report there on the Form 7 anyway, Carl. I don't know if that's highlighted in your financials anywhere, but own use is spelled out there each month.
Page 29.
Yeah.
So I'm still a little confused. I'm sorry. So bear with me. So the 4%, 4.05% for 21, that does not include the loss that of own use.
I'll say it this way. Own use is not considered a loss.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Okay. Last call for questions on this subject before we push on. All right. Thank you very much. So we are moving on to agenda item 5. This is board action agenda. The first item here is SB 107. So who is driving this conversation? Jessica?
That will be Graham, please.
Graham, you're up.
Great, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, can
And this
everybody
starts
see?
on page 58. The dialogue or the memo starts on page 58. Go ahead, Graham.
Yeah, and
Sorry.
so and just sort of along those lines, we do have the memo is marked confidential, but this does relate to this public action item of this resolution. So basically, to give the board a quick background on this, Senate Bill 2019-107 was an act by the Colorado General Assembly that allows for cooperative electric associations to expand existing electrical right-of-ways to include commercial broadband communications. And we have obviously, as LPEA, enacted a goal to pursue funding and partnership strategies that will enable broadband connections to our membership by 2030 without increasing electric rates to do so. And one opportunity that we have had is to partner with Archuleta County and some other groups in Archuleta County. Pagosa Area Water and Sanitation, I believe, is one of them, whereby they would allow us access to their to some of their excess capacity that we could use for operational purposes, and we would allow them access to some of our excess operational capacity. And we, in order to do that, and then this would provide some additional commercial broadband services for the Pagosa Springs area on top of our operational benefit. And so just to make sure we have commercial broadband right of way on that existing line, we were going to utilize the SB 107 procedure to make sure that right of way allows for commercial telecommunications. So that's what the resolution is about. And then see, Kirsten has her hand up.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I move that the board adopt resolution 2021-19, the SB 19-107 authorization.
Terrific. Thank you. Do we have a second on that?
Rachel, second.
Thank you. Okay, so for discussion, Kohler, go ahead.
So on the memo is my first question, and the very last part of that memo, so it's on page 59 of 158, the last part that's in red, and the very last sentence talks about Fast Track does foresee this having a negative impact on business.
Kohler, if we could discuss some of the impact on fast track in executive session, just because they are in a highly competitive business, and I would hate for us to sort of inadvertently disclose some of their corporate strategies in our open session. It's really not our place to disclose that, if you will.
And that was the question, if we're going to discuss in the executive session. So thank you. That was the question. Then on the resolution itself, I thought when you asked to use this SB 107, does that cover our whole system, or is that just this part for this project?
That is an excellent question, Kohler. So if I could sort of try and describe this as best I can. So you use SB 107 one right of way at a time, right? So this particular project, we have a series of statutorily obligated notices that will go out through the mail and by being recorded at the clerk and recorder's office to put landowners on notice that we're moving this direction. So it will apply to certain specific right-of-ways that will go from being, electrical only, or say prescriptive, in that we don't really know the scope, other than we know that they can have electricity in them because they've had electricity in them for 60 years. Those will be specifically expanded, but there are some broader implications about other rights of way obligations that could be used in the future. But specifically, SB 107 expands rights of way not just one property at a time. We're doing several properties here, but like one area at a time. So doing this in Archuleta County won't expand easements, up towards Purgatory. If we had an easement that we wanted to expand up towards Purgatory to allow commercial right of way, we would need to use this notification process again. Does that make sense?
It does. So we might see more of these resolutions in the future then.
Well, I think the idea is to sort of be able to use SB 107 generally, and then if we have an opportunity for a new one in the future, I think it would depend on sort of the operational need of it, whether it needed to go back to the board or not. But the reason we wanted to bring this, and I believe Kirsten was the one who really wanted to have this come to the board in the form of a resolution, is that there are some pole attachment obligations, which frankly we're already complying with, but that are sort of implied by using this for the first time. So when we use SB 107 officially for the first time, we are no longer allowed to have discriminatory pole attachment rates. Everybody has to get the same pole attachment rate, and we are already currently doing that, so it won't result in a change. But I think Kirsten just wanted to, and Kirsten, I'm sorry if I'm putting words in your mouth, but that was sort of the idea that before we use it the first time, the board should be apprised and make a recorded decision for our corporate records. Is that right, Kirsten?
Yes, sir, that's it.
So then again, this resolution kind of opens up the door for this, not just for this project, but kind of clears the way for future projects that can be considered underneath this. Is that right?
Yeah, so then the idea would be that we would be able to utilize SB 107 in order to further LPEA's broadband communication strategic goal. So if we had another partnership opportunity where we're going to be able to expand broadband access to our membership without increasing electric rates to do so by expanding an existing electrical right-of-way to include telecommunications, we could do that through the same process.
Thank you.
Okay, good. All right, thank you. Ted, you're up.
Thanks. So this is back to the first part of Kohler's question, and I think it can be handled without us having to go into executive session. But I think he was pointing out what I believe is a typo on the very last sentence of that page 59 of 158, where we use the word does, and based on the rest of that document, it appears it should be does not or doesn't.
Yeah, that you are right. I'm reading that now, and that red sentence is definitely missing its negatives. That is supposed to be the other way around.
That probably clarify that substantially.
Yeah, that is a bad typo.
And by yes, I mean no.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Dan, you're up. Go ahead. And you're on mute. There you go.
So it's my understanding then this is a blanket resolution and not a specific resolution.
Yeah, that's the resolution as it's stated says that the directors authorizes the staff to use SB 107 to support the broadband communication strategic goal. So I would, if the future request came in that met the broadband strategic goal, this sort of authorizes that going forward, and sort of like we're saying that doing this the first time doesn't commit you to doing it in the future. You still have the discretion of if we want to do it in the future, but sort of once you've done it the first time, you like I said, will at least lose the ability to have discriminatory pricing in our attachment agreements, which is not something we're currently doing.
Yeah, just a little confusing when your intro to this was about the Pagosa project, and and so this is a blanket. So that clears it up for me. Thank you.
Yeah, and hopefully I'll try and make that a little clear, right? Because the memo describes the specific project that we would be doing with this, but if we look at the resolution itself, I didn't put any reference to any specific project in there, and that was sort of the idea that it's a sort of more of a blanket resolution. So I think it might not have, because the memo and the resolution went so closely together, it might not have been self-evident that was the case.
Great. Thank you. All right, Rachel, you're up.
Oh, thank you. The memo alludes to other conversations with other cooperatives that have perhaps exercised this and their experience. Is that something we can talk about here and you can just share a bit about what you learned, or is that something that we would save for a discussion in an executive session?
I would probably prefer to have that in executive session because it's not really our information to disclose. It's information that's been shared with us, and I don't know off the top of my head how confidential it was when it was disclosed to us. So my preference would be to at least initially discuss that in executive session, just because it's not our confidence to waive.
Thank you. Tim, go ahead.
Thanks. So this resolution essentially authorizes LPA staff to exercise these rights in support of the LPA's broadband communications goals, which I think in principle I'm in favor of that, but I don't see any criteria or policy or guideline around where we would or would not expect LPA staff to implement this in other areas or in other situations. And so I guess a question is, are we, as a board, are we expecting to, at any point, to see how these, subsequent implementations would be handled or approved, or do we need to, or is there some guideline that we should expect around where we do and where we don't? It's sort of a blanket open without understanding, I think, for all of us, potentially where and how this might be implemented in the future. So I have a concern about that, I guess.
And I understand that. My thought would be this, that to the degree that LPEA utilizes this, right, it will likely involve resources on LPEA's behalf, and so therefore the board would likely see it through some sort of budgetary process, right? So whether that's through some sort of innovative projects budget request, or some sort of near-term budget request, I think it's there's that seems to me to be the most obvious accountability direction on this. I mean, I will say that like a lot of this is involves operational materials that is just like if we get approached to run a new operational line, the initial filter would probably be through or grid solutions and stuff like that, to just see if that's even something that LPEA has an internal operational need on. And we have some sort of capital. I mean, ultimately these are capital type projects when they get rolled out.
Yeah, I don't know, that seems like one potential point of review. But I mean, if we take what's happening in the Pagosa situation, I don't see that having any, I don't see where that showed up in any budget or any review of a budget. It seems like that was an opportunity. This is a somewhat fast moving landscape with regards to, broadband deployment throughout by other entities beyond ourselves. And we're opening up the potential for our right of way to be utilized by others. I don't know that we control that on a budgetary thing, nor do I think we have a insight into the fast moving nature of it. So in the case of Pagosa, they want to do a swap and so forth, and we see a benefit, they see a benefit, but that's not something that came up in last year's budget deliberation, right? So I feel that there needs to be some level of a guidance around where and when this gets implemented, and not just for the board, but also for the other partners that might be out there that want to utilize this. Or, we, in several town halls or discussions, we've had people who have said, how are we going to implement SB 107, for example, right? And so I'm seeking some way for us to have guidance about when and how this is implemented, so that there's better clarity for the board and for their members and the businesses that might want to partner with in bringing broadband through our strategic goal into the community. So, and I'm concerned about voting to approve this without having some assurance that we will have that other guidance later at some point. Maybe that's a question for Jessica, not Graham. I don't know.
Yeah, Tim, I mean, I think we're trying to understand, because I think we're a little confused, because the broadband committee gave us a policy of how to move forward. We see this SB 107 with our community as a tool for helping meet the broadband policy goal. I'm not exactly sure what you want to see. Do you want to always approve when we're trying to string fiber? which I think that was Graham's point. It's really difficult for us to do that every month. And I don't think that's in the policies of the board. The board authorizes the overall budget, which provides a long-term construction design and planning. So I guess we're a little confused about exactly what you'd like to see, since the Broadband Policy Committee already passed the policy. This is a tool to implement and get us those fiber partnerships.
Well, I think what the broadband committee did was recommend a strategic goal, which we adopted, not a policy. So what I guess what I'm concerned about is that does passing this and doing this somehow result in clarity for those potential partners that we're talking about how they would use SB 107? And is there a review for the board in any way? Not necessarily a necessity for further approvals, but understanding, again, where it's been implemented, how it's being used. It's not just our own fiber, right? It is the ability of other vendors to utilize a right of way to put their own attachments and so forth, right? So it's multifaceted, this implementation of SB 107. And I don't know, I'm curious how we're going to provide that guidance. How does vendor A out there access the ability to do so? Where are we as an organization? How are we implementing it, and what review does the board have of that? So I don't know if, I guess I'm not being very clear. So maybe we should take this offline and chat about it some more. But I mean, it's sort of like we have a line extension policy about how we implement line extensions, for example, right? Mm-hmm. Is this something similar? I mean, there's a policy that guides the actions of the co-op, right, with regards to this, just like we do for some of the other things that we participate in, right? Sure. So I'm not saying we shouldn't do this. I'm just saying that we should have some guidance about how we do it.
Sure. Yeah, I think Tim, one thing that again we're confused about is that we feel that LPEA fiber should be open to all use to reach as many members as possible, and that was what the broadband committee gave us to do. So I think we're confused as to why you would want us to come back for every section to get approval.
I did not say that. Let's be real clear. I never said I was seeking approval. I said I wanted guidelines for the members and a potential for a review by the board as to what's going on with this. So that's not asking for approval every time. So let me just make that perfectly clear. All right. Thank you. So anyway, I guess I'm out on a limb here. I will look at this later. So
I think one thing, it would be good to understand more, Tim, what you're asking on this particular item. I just want to make sure, Dan, I need you to speak up and respond to what, if we don't pass this today, what's going to happen? Because it will impact Pagosa in a negative way.
Yeah, there's grants with timelines associated with it. We have the notification letters ready to drop in the mail today, because we're right up against the window of timing for them to be able to take advantage of that grant. I see Eric Hiddle's online with us here as well, who is spearheading that effort on the Pagosa end. So, if that's why we're here today, is to certainly get the Pagosa side of it addressed, at least.
Yeah, I think I'm really aware of that. I'm not arguing that at all in any sense. I'm failing to communicate. So I think let's go ahead, as far as I'm concerned, on the vote, and we'll try and improve that communication offline somehow.
Okay. Sue, you've had your hand up for a while. Why don't you take it away?
Yeah, I was gonna say, until Dan made the comment that this is time critical, I wanted to send it back to staff to do exactly what Tim was saying, because I'm not comfortable with a blanket resolution. I think it needs to be more on a case-by-case basis. I'm totally in agreement with the Pagosa, but to Tim's point, I think we need some structure behind how this is going to be rolled out so that people understand upfront and can look at that and see what's happening. So as far as a blanket resolution, I'm not in favor of that.
Okay. So this is great, and that's good input. We're gonna so we have an open motion. We're in discussion now, so we're gonna need to do a vote at the end of this. But I think your comment still stands, Sue, that why you believe what you believe and why you're gonna vote the way you're gonna vote. So thank you for that. So I'll get my hand up. I'll have a comment as well. But Kirsten, go ahead.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So Tim has a good point about, well, we will need policies to help support this resolution, as we always need policies to support resolutions. When we did the strategic carbon reduction goal, we didn't have the policies in place. So I would expect that, and they're going to be operational policies. They're not going to be board policies talking about, well, this is how we're going to implement this in the future. Where I have a special request is if we ever, what is it when you pass on, when we ever deputize a company to do that SB 107 for us, I think that's enough of a change that we should at least warn the board on that. But in general, like any resolution, I trust that with verification that the operations is going to do what they say, which is include exercise LPEA's rights under the Act in support of LPEA's broadband communications strategic goal. So if it's not in support of that goal, you can't do it. And that's typically the level of authorization that we give folks. And I appreciate that. Tim has a very good point, though, of operations. We and staff, we need to be thinking about, okay, what does this mean in the future? How are we going to do this? Are we ever going to do the deputizing somebody to do that? And that still needs to happen. But I don't see that would stop us from being able to do this. Just a reminder that this did come up in the last board meeting, and at that time I said, guys, we need to make a conscious decision on this, because it's not just about invoking SB 107 for the good stuff. It's also for that does it open a can of worms. And what Graham has said is, yes, it does start the other processes within SB 107, the most important being that it says that we can't charge discriminatory rates on our pull attachments. Well, I would hope we would never charge discriminatory rates. We don't now, and there's no reason to do it. We still have options on, they still have to be safe, they still have to be, whatever. I mean, there's that whole list of things. So I urge that people kind of think through what we talked about last month, and then there's been some, I sent out an email, it was a confidential email, I did not give my opinions, but I did lay out the facts that this does open some risk, and does the benefit outweigh the risk? Now I can say in open session that I believe the benefit does outweigh the risk, that it makes us more competitive, that it's better for our members, that it's going to make it less expensive for our members to get broadband, and I think it's very important. I also heard that there were two questions that needed to be resolved in executive session. Ted already resolved one of it, having the do not, but Rachel's question about what did other co-ops think does need to go into executive session. I wonder if we need to table this vote until after that executive session. Get the rest of the open session comments out, but then we're going to have to table it because Rachel's question cannot be answered until executive session. And that's a question more than an...
Okay, so let's hear from the rest of the people we're gonna follow it. Like I said, we're gonna follow Robert's rules here. So there is an open motion and a call for a vote. Let's hear the rest of everybody else's comments, and then Graham, you can help me navigate do you want to table it inside a standing vote? But let's get the questions first, or the rest of the discussion done first, because I think well, carry on. Rachel, go ahead.
I think you just hit on mine. It was a question about procedure, knowing that there's some standing questions. And then I have another question about procedure, because this is a resolution. It's not an active vote. And I don't know, I was going to advise we do a straw poll, see if we've got the votes. And if not, I have a question about potential other motion someone could make, but I don't know if it's allowed in Robert's rule. So it's very unclear, but
Okay, so I'll just tell us where we sort of are on that, right? So we've had a motion to approve this resolution in a second, and so now we're having the open debate, and so could be subject to subsidiary motions, one of which would be a subsidiary motion to go into executive session to discuss confidential analysis around the underlying motion, or a subsidiary motion to lay on the table.
Okay. So that makes sense. So we basically sort of do the Russian dolls strategy here. Okay. So let's hear from. I have a comment. I'd like to make mine. Hear from Ted. Hear from Joe, and then we'll decide if we want to sort of step into those Russian dolls. Okay. Is that following good process, Graham?
Yes.
Or good enough. Okay, great. Yeah. So speaking on my personal position on this issue, this feels more ministerial than I think it's being discussed at this. My understanding of this resolution was more ministerial than it's being discussed today, and that what the objective here was to give the staff the authority to take some steps and move forward. It's certainly a couple of key items that are going to be beneficial to Pagosa in the near term. My understanding is that they'll actually be kind of, screwed without it, and because the staff can't act without this resolution, and that there's enough meat on the bones here that they can move forward with, on timelines that are being put onto us as an organization, and then that we have no control over, and that there's enough guide rails on this resolution, as Kirsten noted, that this isn't a blank check. This isn't, a unilateral motion. That all they're trying to do is enable the staff to be able to take some mechanical actions to advance our opportunity to get more funds and move forward without having to go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. So for my 2 cents in advocating for this resolution, I would encourage people to vote yes on this. So thank you. Lower my hand, go back to managing this process. Ted, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Just quick comment more on timing. This was, like Kirsten mentioned, kicked back to staff last month with, I think, pretty clear understanding of why it was important to move it forward, with the project that's actually in process right now and pending some grant funding. I think staff did a great job of coming back with the answers to the questions and publishing that memo. With all I'm seeing, I'm prepared to vote on the resolution.
Great. Thank you, Ted. Go ahead, Joe, please.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand what the risk is here. We've got state law out there looking at us. We're trying to expand broadband, and Tim and Kirsten have talked about risk, and I don't understand what that risk is. So if they could explain that briefly, I'd appreciate it.
Well, I did not present that as a risk per se. I presented as how we are clarifying what we are doing. That's my intent, right? So I'm not trying to stop this resolution. Let's be clear. I will very likely vote for it unless I hear something contrary between now and the vote. My concern really is about we are authorizing something, and I want some assurance about how we are going to manage that authorization. That's all, and convey that to parties that could be partners and or members and so forth who have questions about how they utilize it and when they can't utilize it, so forth. So that's my concern. It's not necessarily about a big risk. I think we addressed that between last meeting and this meeting. And if you want that detail, I think it has to go into executive session. But my concern about any risk that I might have expressed previously is not a concern here at this point. Thank you.
Tim, that's very helpful. So if the board would allow us, I think it would be great to work with maybe Tim and maybe even Holly and Kirsten ad hoc on kind of putting a communication memo together. And I'm not sure if that would address the need, but at least we can start from there.
Okie dokie. So, so to try to bring this discussion.
And John, can I try and maybe answer what I think was Rachel's question that was maybe going to be an executive session? I think if I sort of scrub the identifying data out of it, I might be able to answer her questions, so that there are a few co-ops around the state that have used this in various ways. Some co-ops have used it sort of along the lines where we're doing it, where they go out and expand their own right-of-way with some agreements in place about who's going to have access to that right-of-way. And other co-ops have designated, I think that was the word that Kirsten was searching for when she was saying deputized, they've designated broadband suppliers to do this on their behalf. That's not the direction that we're going here or proposing that we're going. We're proposing that we keep this process in-house where LPEA controls it. But either way, I haven't heard anything negative on this, and it takes up quite a bit of the communications bandwidth on the CREA attorneys' conversations and stuff. That if this had resulted in numerous lawsuits around the state, we would be aware of that at this point, I believe. I mean, which isn't to say that that is impossible, but to the best of my understanding, the co-ops that have rolled this out have not really run into problems with it. Does that answer your question, Rachel?
Yes.
Without going into who they are or what specifically they've done.
Yeah, totally. I just kind of wanted since they've already done it, how they have felt. So that's helpful.
Okay. So there were two ideas I think floated, and please correct me if I'm not summarizing this properly. The one idea was floated that we, in the middle of this, drop into executive session, which sounds like that has been sufficiently answered. And then the second one was possibly tabling this and sending it back down to committee without a vote. So I think if this is the right time, if somebody wants to open up either of those, you can do that now. But absent anybody doing that, then we would call for a vote.
I call for the question.
Oh, God, somebody around here knows Robert rules. Good job.
So now we have to have a vote. We have to immediately proceed with no debate to the vote on calling the question. If 2/3 vote to call the question, then we proceed immediately to the vote on the main motion, which is to approve resolution 2021-19.
Nice. Okay. So all in favor of the vote? So it's vote first, or we just go right to the vote? We have to vote to call the question.
We immediately vote on calling the question. So
okay, all in favor to call the question, hold your hand up, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. All opposed?
So
all abstained.
I saw Kohler opposed calling the question. Did anybody else
No,
oppose?
No, he was just slow on the.
No, I didn't oppose.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. So
Yeah,
it appears it's unanimous to call the question. So then we would
Terrific.
proceed
So now we call the
to
question.
vote on the main motion.
Okay, so the card on the main motion, as it currently stands, all in favor of approving the resolution, hold your hand up, say aye.
Right.
Aye.
Aye.
Get the count there. Okay, all opposed, hold your hand up, say no.
Keep your hand up.
Can you hold your hand up, please, just so we get the, it looks like it's not a unanimous vote.
So Janelle, I have Sue as opposed and all others in favor. Is that correct? Is anybody? All right. Okay, so
Okay,
it seems that
all abstained.
There's nothing to stop here.
Okay, the motion carries. Thank you very much for that. We are way over time and probably due for a break. So I would like to take our 10-minute break right now and then pick it up at the Roundup Foundation director recommendation discussion. Unless anybody else feels differently, I need a 10-minute break. Sound good? Okay, thanks guys. It is exactly 11 a.m. We'll see you at 11:10. Thank you. Okay, we're good to go. Everybody back enough. All right, let's get started on the next item. So we are on Roman numeral 5, section B, the Roundup Foundation director recommendations. Who is driving this one?
I'll take this one. So this is a pretty standard procedural matter, but it is up to the board to approve the board for the Roundup Foundation at the end of each year. We currently have 4 Roundup Foundation board members that are looking to continue their term for 2022, and that's Betsy Ramiri, Naomi Dobbs, Kara Kropp, and Jessica Wheeler. And we have 1 Roundup Foundation board member that does not wish to be reappointed and would like to be replaced. And that is for District 1. And I understand, Bob, that you guys had a candidate to put forward for board consideration.
We do, yes.
You want to tell us a bit about the candidate?
Yes. We had actually a wealth of riches this time around. Sometimes it's not the case. We had several people that were interested. My fellow board members let me kind of twist their arm to go ahead and nominate a gentleman named Leonard Martinez. He's a native son of Pagosa. I went to school with him from the early days. He's been retired back in Pagosa, I should say semi-retired for a few years, but he's heavily involved in the nonprofits and particularly through the Catholic Church. And he's just a terrific guy. He had a long career with digital equipment. He ran one of their plants in Mexico City for several years. And he currently part-time still works with New Mexico State University as a strategic planner, but he has deep roots in Pagosa, knows a lot of people, and really spends all of his extra time working on helping causes. I think he'd be a wonderful addition.
Great. So if there's no further discussion, John, I think we just need a motion from the board to approve the members who wish to continue and the new member as suggested by the directors in District 1.
I'm going to hang on a second. Before you do that, I am going to take a brief moment and just make an absolute crystal clear disclosure. One of the people that you're on this list, Jessica Wheeler, is my wife. And I think you all know that, but I wanted to call it out. So, all right, back to the main event. We need a motion to approve this.
So moved.
Thank you. Second by Ted. Okay, discussion.
I am going to recuse myself from this vote. I am also conflicted. Kara Kropp's one of my best friends. So.
Yep. Okay. I will be doing the same. So, all right. So, absent any discussion, all in favor, say aye. Hold your hand up, please.
Aye.
Thank you. All opposed? Okay. And all abstained?
There's a hand up, John.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Are you jumping in, Kirsten?
Oh, I was
sort of.
I just did it a second too early. I just wanted to acknowledge. So finish the vote and then.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. So and all abstained. I think that's Kirsten, Rachel, and myself.
Actually, Janelle, we can just reflect that John and Rachel recused themselves rather than an abstention. So this would be a 10-0 vote with, and don't count them as abstentions, count them as recusals.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay. Well, that
Can I ask just real quickly, should I get contact information for Mr. Martinez to Hillary?
Yes, please.
Yes, if you could send that to Janelle and I, then we'll make sure to get that to the roundup.
And is the meeting now the fourth Monday? So will they be meeting next week?
It's the last Monday of each month, but he would not be beginning until January because Chrissy will be carrying out the rest of her year.
Okay, great. Thanks. I'll let him know that.
Okay, onward. So we had the break. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Kirsten. Go ahead. I didn't see your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge Christy Smith's work. I know she's going off the board. She was a great asset to the Roundup board, and she really carried the bulk of the effort with Pagosa Outreach Connection. She was the one that showed up most of the time for that. So I really appreciate her work. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you for that comment. Okay. All right, pushing on, we had our break. So now we're moving on to item C. This is the Finance and Audit Committee update. And that will be, who's doing that? Bob? No?
You're muted, Bob. Unmute.
I'm working it, folks. All right, yeah. And my computer's not coming up real good here, so it's a brief report. I wrote that, and I didn't include myself as having attended the meeting, but I did attend the meeting. I'll just have that for the record. We spent our time, the bulk of our time, on the capital budget proposal from staff with capital items and capital projects. Carl's going to go through that in detail. There's some really nice work that's gone on there with getting our, as I note in there, the expense versus actual in the planning process is a lot tighter. If you look on that one graph of what was planned and what actually got spent in years past, there was a big gap. So that just suggests to me that staff's doing and continues to do a good job and a better job of planning and executing what we plan. They've also done a good job of putting more right-of-way work in the pipeline. So if something gets delayed, there's something else to go to and work on. There's going to be a resolution on this. We recommended that the board adopt that. Kirsten, I'll acknowledge that she voted against that motion in committee only because I'll speak for you, hadn't had enough time to review those items, but has since had quite a number of good questions in the email string on that. So that's the essence of it. I'll turn it over. We did have some executive discussion on items that we'll continue to have here at this board meeting related to fast track. And with that, I'll pass it on to Carl to go through in more detail, in the detail he did with us, the budget proposal for capital projects and capital items.
Thank you, Bob. I have a brief PowerPoint. It's really on the budget as a whole, but we do look at some of, I think that there's a key slide looking at where we're spending our money in 2022 that I wanted to share with you. There are a number of documents on the Google Drive. I've shared that link, I think, 2 or 3 times. So hopefully you've had an opportunity to look at some of it. There's an awful lot there. Dan's full capital work plan. I shouldn't just say Dan, because I know his team as a group worked very, very hard on putting that together. And it blows my mind, the level of detail and the thought that goes into that. And I'm incredibly impressed. I only have one co-op to compare to, but there is no comparison, the level of detail that they've gone to. I also really want to thank Kirsten for the questions that she's put across in the last week or so, keeping the conversation going and getting us thinking about some of the things before we look at them. I really appreciate that, Kirsten, so thank you. With that said, I will share my screen real quick. Probably tell from how very similar this looks to the presentation I give every month on the financials. My artistic creativity is not my forte. So the budget book, which is on the Google Drive and I believe is in the board packet, want to very much thank Jenny Taylor from Hillary's team for making us financial people look like we can design stuff. So thank you very much. Hey, so obviously we don't budget to not meet financial goals. That said, the equity percentage, as we've already discussed, is out of that range at the moment. So it decreases somewhat, but not hugely in 2022. So that is certainly something we need to have a look. To predict margins to be around 2.5% of revenues. Operating revenue it's more than 100 million, but it's around that mark. So I always find it useful to think of this 2.5% being 2.5 million, more or less. Which is less than I think where we're going to land in 2021. But I'll reiterate that we kind of took the budget for 2021 as our baseline, assuming that 2022 will be closer to normal, if such a thing even exists anymore. So this may, if we get similar conditions at the beginning of 2022 that we had at 2021, we may see a similar increase in margins, but I really don't see that happening, especially as I think we have budgeted pretty tight. We're only 1% over, well, actually less than 1% over what we budgeted for 2021, and that's with adding positions. There's a new union contract. So there are some significant increases that we know we're going to be dealing with, but we also know that the measures we've taken for efficiencies, to do things more in-house than farming it out, not just in the space of Jerry and Garrett's teams out in the field, but the things we can do in-house, I think, have expanded considerably over the last year or two, and have found ways to do things more efficiently, more effectively, and without paying consultants to assist us. So I know I've heard that some board members had a little concern that maybe we were cutting corners, or that should we be looking at a higher operating cost. We think we're going to be, we looked at where there were differences between 2021 with our budget and actuals, especially in the later months when things were closer to normal. We looked at some of the efficiencies that we had achieved and that we know we can continue to achieve. I point out on the October results, we had some line items which I was easily able to identify as why there was a difference between the budget and where we landed. But one of them was kind of a cost cutting, and it's around $50,000. This is something that we have been doing and that we know we can continue to do. So know that we are not cutting corners. We're not doing things. We're not going to slacken our efforts, especially when out in the field where we're looking at safety, where we're looking at fire mitigation. We are really beefing up our efforts there. We have found ways to, in terms of administration, in terms of process, that are quicker, more efficient, and cheaper. And we're going to continue to find more, and hopefully continue. Well, not hopefully, it is my goal for 22 and going forward is to continue to find those efficiencies so we can operate at a virtually flat operating cost, whilst, obviously inflation is a factor. Obviously, there are new initiatives that we want to pursue, but we will find the money for those as far as we possibly can by being efficient, effective, and not spending anything on consultants, contractors, advisors that we don't have to. So hopefully that gives us some assurance on, that level of operating cost. Kirsten had asked the question about the long-term debt being less than equity. I think we covered that when we looked at the actuals. We're seeing it reduce further by 72 to 72%. I think it's about 74 now. Essentially what we're saying is the margins from 21 and 22 will offset anything. Right, let me get there's about 4 or 5 different parts of this equation, but we do think we're going to borrow more money in 2022. We also know we'll be paying back a considerable amount of the debt that we already have. That's one half of it. The other half is the equity. We know we're going to retire probably a similar amount of capital credits as we did last year, but we also know that we're looking at margins around the 2.5 million of operating revenue plus non-operating revenue. So we see that long-term debt will decrease in its relationship to equity as those move around. We comfortably meet our MDSC covenant. One could certainly argue that's the most important one of all, because that's not something that is internally managed. Our lenders insist on that mark being met, or it's not that they would say, all right, everything you borrowed, pay it back now, but we would be looking at a renegotiation of interest rates and so forth. Looking at our budget highlights, as we mentioned, we're looking at the comparison of the 22 budget to 21. 21 we feel gives us a better baseline. Things I would point out, we do anticipate lower kilowatt hour sales. Once again, that's in the industrial space. We have slightly lower capital expenditures in 22 compared to the 21 budget. There is very much an emphasis on maintenance and fire mitigation in 22. Those are not being increased. Those are actually being increased compared to 21. Some issues I would bring to your attention that we have, I think Bob touched on this briefly, that we're looking at getting more and more projects through the planning, engineering, and right-of-way stage, so that we can then plan more efficiently, more effectively to get projects done in an order that makes sense. So we have several projects that are ready to go at one time. Not only does that help with efficiency, that also helps us going out to contractors to say, we have all of this work that we would possibly like to engage with you, and rather than a one-off bid, we would be looking for better rates from them because we can guarantee them more work. So there's a number of that part of it is one factor in the capital expenditures being lower. Obviously, engineering right of way, although not free, is cheaper than actually putting steel in the ground. There are there are less, Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, you mentioned this, or maybe Jerry did, forgive my memory. But it was something to do, there's less underground work budgeted for 22 than there was for 21, which is always very, very expensive.
Yeah, I'll say there's probably more miles of being of line being rebuilt, but with it being overhead, it's much less expensive.
Yeah, wow, remembering very well today.
Good job, Carl.
Thank you. We see the significant reduction in cost of power. I'll come back to bring that up again. There's a couple of factors there. Obviously, we're selling a lot less kilowatt hours, and we have a 2% rate reduction from Tri-State this year, another one next year. But the headline really is budgeted operating expenses are within 1%. Capital expenditures are actually 6% lower, but hopefully you'll be reassured that's not cutting corners or doing things where we're going to compromise any safety or certainly reliability. Those are our absolute priorities. Now, this is where the artistic muscles of the finance department are really flexed with our watering can analogy. So really all we're saying is the green arrows are the water coming into the can. You know, this is where we raise money. This is where we make our money. We have sales, which is obviously the vast majority of it. From revenue from electric sales, we are forecasting $15 million in loan financing to help with the capital projects. As you know, and just to remind you, the facility, we have a $50 million facility with CFC for capital projects already in place. So we don't have to go out and put those all together to get that loan financing. That's already in place, and we only draw down as we need it, and we only pay interest as we draw down. Non-operating income, we have forecast as $1.5 million in cash. That is something of a guess because we don't know. The vast majority of that is what we're going to get retired, and we just don't know right now. So could be more, could be less. Then the red arrows, which Dan very kindly pointed out, should all go down, but my watering can actually defies gravity. So these are where we're going to spend our money. We've got the capital projects, we've got the capital items. Obviously, we have the huge power bill. That's always going to be the biggest one of our expenses. We have our operating expenses, but obviously we exclude depreciation there because that's not a cash expense. We've got to repay our debts, and we have $4.5 million currently budgeted as capital credit retirement. That may be higher, that may be lower. It will really depend on our cash situation when we get to that point. So you will see that we have budgeted incoming cash to be $900,000 higher than outgoing cash. So that's something to think about when you see, the $2.5 million operating margin, and we think, right, let's go and retire more money to the members. We are actually only going to have $900,000 cash being generated after all of these budgeted expenses. Well, obviously, we have capital credit retirement baked into that forecast. But incoming and outgoing cash does the $900,000 difference. You will see that on the balance sheet and on the cash flow statement. So, just a summary of where we're at in terms of your guys' review and approval. We have one tick mark at the moment, and that you did approve the margin and the income statement last month. We have the capital items budget, capital projects budget, the balance sheet and cash flow statement are still hopefully something you will approve today via resolution 2021-20. And as Bob mentioned, the Finance and Audit Committee had recommended that you do so. So your plan was not so much to present the capital projects budget again, but more to, give a brief summary and then maybe address any questions that board members had.
Also, just to, at some point, we need to kick it over to Dan to answer some of the questions. So Kirsten sent some good email questions that I think we should address after you're ready for that one.
Yeah, sorry, Jessica, good point. Do you want to go through any questions on that presentation, or should I kick it over to Dan for, addressing Kirsten's questions on the capital projects and any other questions on the capital? Got a question from Carla?
First, I want to thank you very much. I think the documentation and the presentations you've provided are really powerful, very, very good, better than I've seen anywhere else. So thank you much. I do have a question on page 78 of 158, the departmental income statement. And on that, you have both property insurance and property tax being less than it was last year. And I know with Tri-State, in our budget for Tri-State, they're expecting a 25% increase in insurance. And there's some different reasons, but I look at my commercial policies that I personally have, and the property tax has stayed flat. The liability has gone up quite a bit, but I haven't seen anything go down. And then also the property tax going down, and maybe you guys know more than I do. I'm excited about that, but I don't know where that comes from. So maybe if you could just give me a little bit of information on those two, I'd appreciate it.
Thanks, Carla. Yeah, property tax, we did end up paying slightly less in 21 than we budgeted. So that's the 2021 budget number that you're seeing. So we've put that to be flat with what we actually paid in 21. I think overestimated our property additions when we budgeted 21. So we're pretty confident with that number. On insurance, we have a 2-year term, so we know that we entered into this year, and we know that number is going to be that budgeted number is what we're going to pay next year to Federated.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla. Joe?
I'm not sure on the order of things, but just a couple questions and a comment. First of all, the comment on the, I know it's a small amount, but the $43,000 for xeriscaping at the office. I think it's really important that our type of agency shows that we're trying to conserve water, because there's not enough attention being paid to that, in my opinion, in Durango. So thank you for including that. Look forward to seeing what that looks like. On page 89 of 158, and this is, again, just probably because I don't understand it, but line 11, total kilowatts sold are 908 million. And then that line 15 is total kilowatts purchased, which is 947 million. And I was just kind of curious what the difference is. At line loss, or why is there a disparity there?
Yeah, it's kind of following on from the discussion Dan and Kirsten were having earlier this morning. It's the two real factors there are line loss and own use. So it's what we use at the offices and at the substations ourselves.
Okay, so that disparity is not anything out of the ordinary then?
Really not, no.
Yeah, okay. And then my last question is, Jessica, is in the federal infrastructure bill, is there any money that would be going to co-ops, generally or specifically? Do you know yet?
There will be, yeah. And in fact, I do head to Washington, D.C. the second week of December, and I am meeting with the Deputy Secretary of the Energy and Environment out of Department of Energy. And so we're going to talk about funding that is going to be going to co-ops. So there is a lot of money, both for broadband, actually, and for kind of R&D, DER, beneficial electrification, all sorts of projects. So yeah, there'll be a huge opportunity.
Great, thanks.
Tim?
Thanks. Yeah, I don't know if Joe just asked the same question or not, but same page that he was referring to, page 89, I have a couple of questions. One is, and maybe this was the same he asked, and if so, I apologize. The residential sales show an increase in the budget for kilowatt hours sold over the 2021 projection, but a loss of revenue. And I don't understand why. I mean, it goes up pretty substantially in kilowatt hours sold, but the revenue is a negative number. So is there it seems counterintuitive to me. So I think I'm missing something.
And let me double check on that one and get back with you there.
Okay.
I can't think of a reason for that right off the top of my head either.
Yeah, unless demand went down or something, or
really the contributing factors to revenue is it's the kilowatt hour sales and the base charge, the power charge. So,
and then at the very bottom, line 16 on that, I think there's something missing there. It shows a negative $68 million. I think there's something missing in the total.
Didn't total.
All right. So I just want to make sure we weren't, I wasn't reading this wrong. So, yeah, that's it. The other thing I will just say is echo what I think Kohler said, which is I'm very impressed and gratified as to why there is as to this budget presentation and the process and so forth. In like a short 2 years, we've completely turned around this analysis, presentation, and also just the implementation of this budget. And I want to give a lot of kudos to finance, but also the rest of the staff for doing this. I don't have a lot of questions now. That's a really good thing. So I appreciate it very much.
Rachel?
Yeah, thanks for putting this together. I'm sure it's a lot of work. I'm so curious to hear what staff thought about zero-based budgeting and if it was helpful. But I'm on page 87 of the report, or of the director's point. There's 3 columns, and one of the columns says projected year end 2022. Just to clarify, I think is that supposed to be 2021? Okay, perfect.
Olaf caught that one as well, but yes, you're quite right.
And then I had another question, and I'm sorry, I couldn't make the FAC meetings, or it was during the workday. But so I'm on page 76 of the report, and there's just a bunch of lines where the 2021 year-end projections are significantly different than the 2022 budget. So trade accounts payable, deferred credits, distribution received from association orgs, temporary investments. I'm curious if you have any insight there.
So this is on
page 76, the cash flow statement.
Okay, so this is another one that Jessica and I spoke about, and what a cash flow statement shows is movements in balance sheet accounts, and that doesn't really tell you very much. It does when you're looking at it from an accountant's eye, and I don't know that it's particularly useful for a non-accountant. So what we are planning to do for the next board meeting is to kind of redo this in what you call, I can't remember the exact terminology for it. I think it's a direct cash flow statement. Those directors who are more au fait with finances, maybe you remember and what it does is it's more not what happened to your balance sheet, but this is what I got from selling stuff. This is what I spent on stuff. This is what I spent on. So it's more what you actually spent. And I think that will give you a clearer picture of what's happening. I mean, I'll give you an example. You've got long-term debt on this cash flow statement. 2021, it's a really big negative that we're 5.5 million down. And then the next year, it's like 5 million up. You know, goodness me, that's one is that all we did in 21 was pay back debt. And in 22, we're also going to be paying it back, but we're going to borrow some as well. So, you know, that's a really easy one. That's probably why I chose it. Can you mention one of the others, Rachel, that you identified as looking a bit odd?
Well, I think the overall principle covered it for me. So
Okay.
I don't need any clarification. Thanks for educating. I appreciate it.
Yeah, but I really do think, like, you brought that up, Jessica brought that up to me. We're going to go with that direct cash flow, and it's a bit of a pain to build it the first time, but once you've done it, then you're just adding to it each month. I think that's going to be really useful for me, for the staff, and for the directors.
Okay. Anything else for Carl? Okay, great. Thank you again. Things are looking good. Appreciate it. Okay, it is 10 to noon.
Can I make a motion on the resolution, John?
Yeah.
Oh, geez, sorry.
Yeah, I'd like to move to approve resolution 2021-20, the budget resolution on page 95 of your packet.
A second.
Excellent. All right. Any discussion here? Thank you. Kirsten, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to vote to approve, but there were some unanswered questions that I think Dan was going to take an opportunity to answer, and I'd like to give him that chance before we actually, or you could just do it by email.
Yeah, would you like me to go through those right now, John, real quick?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, great. Yeah, Kirsten sent us another list of great questions, and most of these pertain to the capital projects budget. And what I appreciate the most is that Kirsten actually read all 130 pages of the capital projects budget. So Kirsten, kudos to you, and thank you for looking over that. Although we read through these as staff, sometimes things do slip past us that you caught on a couple of these that I'll go over here. First off, most of what I'll be referencing, just to give you a page reference on the board packet, will be on page 92 and 93. And what that is a capital projects summary that I'm probably going to speak to, even though Kirsten had specific pages within the capital projects budget. I'll probably talk off of this page here. And one of the questions that she had was related to fire mitigation. You'll see that we put an asterisk in the summary by projects that involve fire mitigation. And on this particular version here that's in your board packet, we expanded it just a little bit to provide some of that clarity. And one of the things we did is at the very bottom of page 93, we explained that asterisk a little more. We not only said projects that reduce wildfire risk, but we sort of gave some color as to what that meant. And it says, any project that reduces the risk of an energized wire contacting the ground, or a project that minimizes the likelihood of igniting a fire if a wire does touch the ground. Okay. And so when, if you recall Jerry's presentation on wildfire mitigation that he gave to us several months ago, there were 3 key aspects to that. There was prevention, protection, and restoration efforts that we take on. This mostly lies in the prevention and somewhat in the restoration side of it. That protection, like protecting our structure, those kind of expenses will show up in our operating budget when like pole wraps and that sort of thing. But so that's just giving some color on what we're putting an asterisk by here when we define something. Now, one of the questions Kirsten asked directly is up on the towards the top of page 92. We had some transmission additions that had asterisks by, but we didn't have an asterisk by 1006, which was ordinary replacements of transmission. To Kirsten's point, yes, that should have been flagged as a fire mitigation measure as well. So this one does have that asterisk by it now. Let me pull up some of those. So that hit that. Then there was also some questions about can we provide some rough estimate on when we say to be determined in a total cost or a subsequent budget on some of these projects that we're only doing right-of-way and engineering on right now. And what we found is that there's been so much shifting in cost of materials, cost of labor to do some of these things. It's been hard to pin it down, but what we do to give you an estimate is when we say right-of-way and engineering, we estimate 10 to 15% of the total job is going to be right-of-way or engineering. So if you sort of take that number, do a little bit of math, you get a rough estimate on what the total project's going to be. From a real broad standpoint, we aren't going to really try not to commit to too much of a number until we actually get boots on the ground, looking at the project, see what kind of gas lines are in the way or rocks are in the way. But that's a real rough ballpark, Kirsten, to help you there. And then there was a question asked about quarters. They're in the actual full budget towards the end. It does provide a breakdown in what quarter we expect the expenditure to be. And what you'll see in that is that we often just say, yeah, we're going to be working on this every quarter of the year. And that's probably going to be a feature that we may be pulling out because we just don't have that kind of granularity in our projects. We're going to see a little bit of a reformatting of this as we go into next year, as we get some better tools to work with on the development of this. We've tried in the past to try to give it some quarters. It's really tough because everything's sort of either landed across the board or all in the building season of quarters 1 or 2 and 3. So I wouldn't put a whole lot on that right now. Nor is it something we really need for the operation of our company for budgeting purposes there. Let's see if we had, there was 2 questions, Kirsten, that you had on 2 projects specifically. And there was a line rebuild that was called, it was project 300-139 Capote West rebuild. And there was another one in regards to the twin cable replacement, project 300-156. And what you found there was, even though we flagged that as engineering right-of-way only, your question was, wow, that seems like an awful lot of money for engineering right-of-way only. So what that it was incorrectly marked there as engineering right-of-way only. That is the construction cost. What happened was we've had some complicated right-of-way issues on those, but some of those were seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. And so we do think those will be built in 2022. So that is actual construction on those, because we had been in right-of-way and engineering in 2021. That's why there's prior expenditure there. We sort of at one point thought that, man, it's going to take us all next year to get this figured out as well. But now things are coming together. So we last minute made a change to actually, so the budget number is correct. It was just incorrectly flagged as in right-of-way and engineering only. So we'll include construction. Okay. Then there was a question on the Pagosa substation rebuild. Can we elaborate on the difficulty on why, you know, in the description, it says past attempts have been difficult. We have, I'll say we have a new approach now. Several years ago, our approach was probably, okay, let's go put an offer on the property. Yes, we're going to put this here, without a lot of prior engagement with town and county entities, without building support beforehand, and it failed. And so now we're taking a slightly different approach. We're finding property. We're trying to get support of our construction project beforehand, build as much of that as we can, and then, you know, piecing things together as opposed to just coming to landowners and like saying, hey, by the way, we're going to have a substation in your backyard. I'm really trying to build that case more on the why, you know, and creating that story and narrative behind it. But the first thing we have to do is just find that property. But that was the difficulty we had in the past. We did find some property. It was in an area that people didn't think was a good area to put one, and we ran into some opposition there. So we've got a couple of properties identified. We're going to, you know, hopefully narrow it down to 2, and then work with our appropriate entities and try to lay some groundwork with Hillary's help there beforehand. And then I think one of the last questions was around the 69 kV mobile substation. That has been a bit of a nightmare for us trying to get this equipment here. Some lessons learned. We've had some challenges with COVID and supply chains is really what it comes down to. Each moment of the game we evaluate it's like, okay, how much money have we spent on this so far? Do we drop this and go with another vendor? Can we get something quicker by another means? Trying to balance what we already have invested versus getting it here more quickly. And each time we do that, our conclusion is we've got a bit invested here. Let's see this through. That's still the path we're on. Right now, we're waiting on the trailer itself. They have the mobile substation all ready to go. They just need to put it on the trailer. They're waiting on the trailer. Still expecting to get that here in March or April of 2022. There is a significant prior expenditure because we have a payment schedule associated with that. So they have the transformer in place. They've got the switch gear in place. We make payments on some of those as those come to reality and are built specifically for us. And so that's the final, it's sort of like a retainer payment that we still have to make on it, which will be coming in 2022. So I think that the formatting got a little scattered as this came across, but I think that covered most of them. Kirsten, if you can think of any others that I didn't cover, let me know.
Dan, I think you covered them all. I did also send that formatting, or it's in Google Docs, because I know when I put it in email, it just went all askew. So, but I don't think you missed anything. I do want to take the opportunity. It wasn't in the capital projects budget, but it was in the operating budget. That there's a couple of kind of more generic items that I wanted to make sure that it was clear what they were being used for, and I used a term that can be kind of accusatory, and I just wanted to make sure that.
I don't think that was a question to me, was it? I didn't catch the last part of it.
Yeah.
Looks like the technical difficulties continue.
Yeah, I thought okay.
That's what it looks like to me, but.
All right, let's give her another second here. She can come back on if she does. Right, the vote here.
Okay, sorry guys, that it wasn't taken that way.
We lost you.
Yeah.
You went to mute and your video's gone. So
Kirsten, we lost you for the last 30 seconds of whatever you were saying.
I think if I pieced it together, she was saying there could have possibly been something that she mentioned that was accusatory, and I didn't take anything that way. So no problem on my end, Kirsten.
Okay. Okay, Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, before I sign this resolution or my signature goes on it, I'd like to see the formatting cleaned up a little bit where you've got words that's split in half on the resolution.
Yeah, we can take care of that for you, no problem.
Okay. Any other items here? Any other thoughts? Okay, well then I think vote time. So yes, all in favor, hold your hand up, say aye.
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 Aye. Thank you. All opposed? Thank you. All abstained? So just as a procedural, or as you're recording accounts, Janelle, Sue had to step away. She texted me privately. She had a family matter.
Kirsten doesn't seem to be on board. I don't know.
Lost Kirsten.
She didn't vote in any direction. So. Just as
okay.
We still couldn't hear you, Kirsten. Can you?
Voting yes.
Perfect.
There we have it.
Sorry, John. I don't mean to step on you there.
No, I appreciate it. Okay. So do we need to? Okay, so we have. Do we need to do anything else here? Sue's unavailable to vote. Okay, then we are good procedurally back into the agenda here. All right, it is noon. Yay, back. We are, good God, we are back on schedule. Why don't we just take the 30 minutes as normally planned? Usually in the past, we do this little juggling exercise, but let's be back here at 12:30, excuse me, 12:30 sharp for the update. You have a 28-minute break, and remember, we're on the clock with our lawyers, so let's get that started promptly at 12:30. We'll see you in a little bit.
Okay, let's get going here. Okay, so just to get everybody reoriented back in, where we are doing Roman numeral 6, the attorney update of FERC Adams County, Colorado PUC. And this is the public session, and then we'll step into executive session. Matt, take it away.
Great, thank you, John. Appreciate it. Nice to see all of y'all again. Quick update today. I think the biggest item that's the FERC 206 proceeding for Tri-State CTP that has been opened, and I believe we discussed last time, has been assigned to a trial judge. So that case will begin moving forward. Currently going through the process of determining schedules for filing of testimony, going to hearing. A hearing's anticipated in the spring of 2022. So that case is moving, and it's moving pretty fast. So that's really update number one. The BDP remains in a settlement discussion. So still under the settlement privilege, but that process is moving forward. So essentially what's going on is you have the BDP, the part that's in a settlement context, that remains as it was. The CTP, which is the full buyout, that's now moving forward into a FERC 206 litigated proceeding, and going to begin moving forward, and that will ultimately essentially go to trial. Absent a settlement. A settlement can still happen in a FERC 206 proceeding, but it is not a proceeding like the other ones where it's structured around trying to find a settlement. Rather, it's structured as more formal litigation, so much more like what LPEA experienced when we went through the Colorado PUC process. So I would say it's a lot closer to that than it is to what we have been doing at FERC. And then those are really the two largest updates for today. I'm happy to take any questions about the interaction of those two things, next steps, anything like that. Tim, I see your hands up.
Go for it.
Thank you, Matt. Welcome back.
Thank you.
So I've been asked a couple times about this, and I've described it a particular way. I'd like to make sure that I'm not off base here, but my understanding is that the FERC accepted the filing of Tri-State for the process and an exit for its members, and that is accepted as a rate filing, such that there's a way for members now to have some clear process for exiting Tri-State, but they did not accept the actual formula that Tri-State has set for setting the exit fee, right? And so the good news is, at this point, through the FERC regulatory body, Tri-State cooperative members are acknowledged that there is going to be a rate that allows them to exit. The poor news, if you will, is that there is no clear formula for setting the exit fee to do so, and that formula is what is going to litigation. So am I out of bounds there in any way in that explanation?
Yeah, I guess I would think about it somewhat differently. That FERC has accepted their filing. That's kind of a term of art at FERC. There's a difference between acceptance and approval. So they have accepted it. The formula remains open to debate over the course of the case. The difference with a 206 case versus the 205 case, and why it's important under the Federal Power Act, is that under the 206 case, FERC can actually just come up with its own formula, or take other interveners' formulas. They are not kind of wedded to the architecture that's brought forward by the applicant. So it is quite a bit different, and the difference in Federal Power Act sections that govern the proceeding make a pretty big difference. So while I would agree with you that there is not per se a formula right now, with the objective of obtaining a just and reasonable exit charge formula, this is on a good track.
All right. Hey, thank you much for that.
Yep.
Correction there.
Anybody else?
Terrific. Anybody else here for Matt in public? Okay. Okay, terrific. Then we're going to need a motion to go into executive session.
Move to go to executive session.
Thanks, Ted. And second,
Second.
Joe. Joe, thank you. All in favor, hands up. Aye.
Hi.
Thank you. Anybody opposed? Hands down.
I got a question from Kohler.
No. Oh, I'm sorry. Was that a question, or were you getting your hand up?
Yeah, I do have a question. Just my status of the executive session, please.
Yes. Jessica, you have any guidance here?
Yeah, I would look to Matt. I think that just the nature of the discussions around settlement and where we're at FERC, it's probably best if he recuse himself.
I would agree.
Is that right, Matt? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Although
Thank you.
Although I do have one brief issue that I would like to bring up that deals with different litigation. So I think it still falls under the executive session discussion of litigation matters with legal counsel, but I would like Kohler to be able to be back for that. So do we have, Kohler, you have a link to the executive session, and if somebody gets you a text message, you'll be able to come back in?
Yes.
Okay. Terrific. Okay, so everybody square on their link over to the executive session. Anybody need any assistance before we drop off? John Lee?
Okay, we'll send you the link.
Okay.
Janelle, can you do that again for John, please?
Sent. Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll see everybody on the other side.
Great, thanks, Phil.
Be back. Two, three. Is that everybody? Yes. Okay. Onward. So we have just to sort of reorient everybody back into the main agenda. We are on item 8. There were in fact no board actions from coming out of executive session. So we will move right into item 9, which are the reports, starting with the attorney report.
Thanks, John. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen really quickly here. Hopefully you saw this memo, which is not actually answers to director legal questions. I'm sorry for not catching that there, but this is the review of our voting districts, and just big thanks to Don Short, our GIS service specialist, who prepared this information to him, and a big mea culpa on my part for not being able to recognize that our numbers grew instead of shrunk, as got called out on by some directors. My math was off. I got these inverted. But the reality is, if we compare these percentage numbers, you'll see they're about, I would think, as close to 1/4 of our membership in each district as we could really hope to get, especially with sort of generic and easy to identify markers like Highway 160 and Hermosa Creek as the boundaries. So based on that, I would recommend that we leave our district boundaries unchanged for the 2022 election. I think there are probably 2 ways to handle this procedurally if the board would like. One would be just sort of a motion and a vote to keep them the same, and another one would just be we acknowledge it and we're going to keep it the same because you're not really taking an action because you're not changing anything. I'll just have the minutes reflect that this was reported and the board decided to take no action on that the board reviewed the boundaries as is required and chose to take no action. So
great.
So
all right, any other comments on this? Sorry, juggling. Good.
Okay, and then so if the no action taken, just have that noted in the minutes, and then I'll open up the remainder of my attorney report for questions.
Okay. Oh, there we go. Rachel, you're up.
Thanks. Yeah, I was just kind of reflecting on this as I was reading through the CREA packet and a few other things that just bring up, a state legislative update, and then some things on the Build Back Better, I think, or maybe it's the Infrastructure and Jobs Act. I can't remember quite. And can you remind me, what did we decide about who's tracking legislative affairs? Is it our attorney, we had this conversation at some point. In the past, it was our CEO. We'd get a legislative update, kind of this tracking tool. We had this conversation, but I can't remember. Was it Holly? We decided like our CREA reps doing that and alerting us.
Yeah, I think, Holly, correct me. I think that was the discussion because CREA does a really good job. And actually they just sent out a very detailed email. I'm not sure if that was forwarded to you. I'm happy to do that right now, but it gives a breakdown of all the legislative items happening and kind of the timelines. So maybe I'll just go ahead and send that just in case folks wanted to refresh.
Yesterday I discovered that I might have failed to attach a CREA legislative update to an email I sent last Friday. So I discovered that yesterday that I might have made that error. So I can resend it just to make sure I sent it. But it did talk about the recent legislation that just passed, and Governor Polis is also proposing a giant air quality package that's going to include things like $150 million for EV school buses. So it is definitely worth looking at, and I'll go and I'll send that right now just because I think I might have forgot to the other day.
Okay. Terrific. Okay. Kirsten, go ahead.
I agree that the CRA is a great place to look for it. The other place to look is in Kohler's report when he uploads the legislative committee stuff, because it talks about those. And it's sometimes interesting to see what stance Tri-State might take on something versus what stance CREA takes on something, and what different folks are tracking. And in addition, with the Tri-State one, you also see what's happening in other states around us, because that it can impact what might be coming up. So y'all might want to take a look at that. And one thing to keep in mind with the CREA or the Tri-State one is, as you're looking at them, think through, well, why in the hell, we don't want to do that. We don't want to support that. And so we can give that feedback to Holly, or we can give that feedback to Kohler about getting, giving some pushback of, well, why are we supporting that kind of thing?
Okay.
And I'll just say too, Rachel, that that Jessica and I participate with CREA a lot when the legislature is in session as well. So you'll see more of that in my monthly report when the legislature is in session. It's more sort of active participation. We're sort of in monitoring phase where we monitor what CREA is forwarding to us, but that's why I haven't really included it in recent reports, that we're not really taking much action at this point. We're just monitoring.
Perfect. Tim, go ahead.
Yeah, in that context, I think with the approval of the new redistricting maps, we have a different state senator that we need to talk with. And I just don't, I think my sense is that we had a good relationship with Quorum, and he understands the cooperative model pretty well, electric utility, as well as he was quite supportive of broadband. And I'm not sure at all where the state senator that we're going to have for the next year, who's out of San Luis Valley, is on any of this. So I hope that we can, maybe Jessica or could start building a relationship with that state senator, because it's a bit of a wild card for us right now, I think.
Yeah, Tim, that's a great point. I'll make sure I put that on my to-do list.
Maybe invite him to a meeting or something. I don't know.
Yep.
I have no idea. I leave that to your judgment. But
all right, thank you.
Terrific. Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know who submitted it, but I want to thank Graham for the explanation on the contractors and how those are hired. Every once in a while, I get a question about that. So very helpful. Thanks.
Terrific. Appreciate that. Okay. Any other comments for Graham? Okay. Terrific. Thank you. All right, Graham, thanks so much. Okay, so we are now going to go to 9B, the director reports, and we're going to kick that off with the Roundup Foundation report.
I'll tackle that one, John.
Go get them.
All right, so if you're wanting to look, it starts on board packet page 101 of 158. I've included with the report a copy of the agenda from the October meeting and then the approved minutes from the previous meeting, from the September meeting. Quick highlights, the finances for the organization remain sound, and we continue to grow in terms of participants. And I guess a side note is thank you to Hillary for helping continue that process. My most recent bill had a nice little reminder of you know, what Roundup does for our community, and how you can flip your bill over and check the right box. So that seems to be doing what it's supposed to do. As far as grants, we fully funded one Roundup grant for just under $2,000 and 2 educational grants totaling $5,500. We also took action to make a $500 donation in Jeannie Bennett's name to her selected charity, which is Shop with a Cop. Typically, that's we usually give a $300 donation when Roundup board members sort of retire or move off the board, and the whole board agreed that it made a lot of sense to bump this up, even a trivial amount of $200, because of the exceptional and long-term service that Jeannie provided. Along the same lines, with Jeannie's departure now, the Roundup board is going to have to work to be a bit more efficient and wean ourselves a bit off of reliance on LPEA staff, which certainly is at a premium these days. And we've gotten some good guidance already from Jessica and other LPEA staff about how we can make that transition. There'll be some teeny growing pains, but I don't really see it being anything that, you know, in the end will come out better. In the end, it'll be a nice opportunity to reshuffle, restructure, and kind of get the organization operating at the most efficient way that it can. So that's all I have for the report, unless there's questions.
Go ahead, Kirsten.
Kirsten, go ahead.
Ed, I do agree that it's going to be a good challenge, and a challenge once it is met will make the organization better. You know, Jeannie was the corporate memory, and you could always say, well, didn't we do something? And she'd say, yeah, in 1998, we blah, blah, blah. So I think it's that will be missed, and figuring out how to incorporate that into your thought process is going to be an interesting challenge. So good luck with that.
What district does she live in? Maybe she'd like to be on the board.
I believe she's moving out of district.
She already moved to Florida. She is on.
Moving to the sunshine. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jessica, but she has agreed to be available for us to reach out to for some fairly significant period of time, so we don't totally lose that historical perspective.
That's right, Kirsten. So she actually is working on an hourly basis to help us with the transition, which is great. But we still have employees at LPEA like Sid. She's been around for what, 42 years, Carl? And she is exceptional institutional knowledge. So we still have quite a number of employees that have worked at the utility over 30 years that can help us too.
Okay. All right, that's it.
All right. Tri-State, Kohler.
Thank you. So my report is in the packet there. You can take a look at it. I'll touch on a few things that are not in there, or I'll highlight them. First, let me just mention, because it was talked about the government relations. And in the first page of my report, the external affairs report that I do, under government relations, there is a link there that will take you right into the presentation in our LPEA's drive. Also, it was mentioned earlier about the capital credits. I think, Kirsten, you mentioned that it'd be good if we kind of tied our years into when Tri-State is, the 2004 mark. I don't believe that that will last for very long, staying in sync with Tri-State, and for two reasons. One is that the New Mexico co-ops that came into Tri-State through Plains, they aren't eligible for a refund until they start distributing the 2008 allocations. So there is a push to try to just not do FIFO, but do a little something different so that they can get some kind of a refund, which will change the date that goes out. The second thing is also that if you look at, and I think I shared the chart with you last week via email, but the allocations that are facing Tri-State right now are very high. The next couple of years, it's 40 million a year, but then it goes up to almost $100 million. And I think that begins in 2007. So even at the rate of, if they were to distribute 30 million a year, that's going to take quite a bit to get even up to 2008. So I don't think that alignment will stay for very long, maybe a year or two. Moving on, I already mentioned earlier about the insurance inflation, that there's an actual presentation in the packet, in the drive, that you can take a look at if you want to. I think one of the main drivers for insurance inflation for Tri-State is a lot of insurance companies will no longer insure anybody that is burning coal or mining coal. So the competition is becoming less and less. And speaking of coal, coal is becoming a very tight commodity right now, and the main reason is because of the supply chain. Tri-State's having a very hard time getting their coal around because of the train transportation. Springerville, and I think they usually keep 30, I might be wrong on this, but 30 to 35 days of supply on hand. And right now they're down in the, almost in the single digits. So they're struggling to keep their supplies up. And the main part is because of the rail. The rail is being designated to help with the other supply chain. They just don't have room to haul the coal, nor do they have the desire. And it's the same with gas right now. Gas prices are going very high. You also can't buy gas. So Tri-State wanted to hedge on some of their gas. They're unable to. They have a major pipeline to the north and one to the south. Neither one of them would release any more capacity allotment to Tri-State. So we'll have to kind of keep an eye on that. WAPA is going to have a 11.2% increase starting December 1st, and then they'll reevaluate that on a quarterly basis. So I think we'll see quite a different activity with WAPA as far as pricing goes. Then Tri-State also suspended a program called the Payment Deferral Application. What that was for co-ops that were struggling during the pandemic of having some of their members not pay them, and then they would struggle to pay Tri-State. This is to help them out. Nobody applied for it, so what we did is we suspended it, but it is still on the shelf. It can be brought back at any time. Several times during the meeting this time, it was stressed by Dwayne and a couple of people of his staff that Tri-State still does have that 8% rate reduction in mind. It is still a goal of theirs. They're still working on it. And they always say, we're not sure how we're going to get there, but we're going to keep trying. A rate committee is being populated right now. It should start in the beginning of January. One of the main things that the rate committee will be working on is formulary rate design. And then there's other issues that will come up. So we'll hear more about that when we get closer. And then one of the big talks right now at Tri-State is crypto mining. And crypto mining has been knocking on the doors of quite a few of the member co-ops, trying to move into their territory. And it's a pretty interesting subject. It's a very high load. The one that talked last week that we discussed about at Tri-State is 100 megawatts. But it's pretty risky because they have everything in containers. They move in and they can move out as fast as they move in. But it could be also very profitable. So I don't know if they've knocked on our door before. I can't imagine this being an area for them, but maybe it is. But I know Tri-State is getting 4 to 5 inquiries a week from crypto mining companies that want to start up in their territory. that's pretty much all I have as far as the highlights, and I'll take any questions if you have them. Kirsten, looks like your hand is up.
Go ahead,
Yeah.
Kristen.
Caller. When you say refunds, you're talking retirement, right?
Yes, retirement.
You know, Tim started using, whoever your chair is, I'm forgetting, Tim
Raybon.
Yeah, he started using the term refund, and it kind of threw me for a loop. Okay, so that's retirement. So one thing about keeping the retirements in sync, I would think that if Tri-State is only going to refund a certain part of, let's say, 2004, because it's a big one, or 2005, I'm not sure what year they're going to be doing, that we would be retiring that same amount, so we would still keep in step with them, I think. And that might be a question for Carl, and maybe the broader question is, would we ever retire more allocations, more Tri-State allocations than that have been retired to us?
So maybe I misunderstood as far as trying to get an alignment. Because now that you mentioned what you did, I can see it's a little different than I interpreted it. So yes, I would guess that, and Carl could back this up, that we would stay in alignment with what we get from them and how we turn it back over to our members. I thought what you meant was that, you know, they're working on their 2004 and we're working on our 2004. But we might get ahead of them quicker because they're going to start slowing down on those years. On that part. So maybe I need to think this out a little bit more so I make sure I interpret it correctly to answer that for you.
So I have a follow on that. Carl, could you answer that question about would we ever retire more than was retired to us from one of the Tri-State or WUE or anything like that?
Graham, is there not a policy that says you can't do that? I mean, from a purely financial and cash flow point of view, I would suggest that that's not a great plan and you would want to keep them pretty level. But maybe I'm just remembering wrong when we looked at something where you cannot retire more. Maybe just misremembering. So it's something we can discuss.
Yeah, I mean, we do have some decent regulations on our retirement that go all the way up into our bylaws, like not even just at the policy level, but the bylaw level. So I'd be happy to take a deeper dive and come back with a more fleshed out answer in my memo for next month, if you want to send me an email of your precise questions on that.
And then Colin,
so I might just add one thing. I'd just add one thing. That is that when we pay estates, that is paying in advance. And though it's usually not much, over the years, it adds up to quite a bit. So, just a thought.
No, sorry to jump in when I see hands are still up, but I just wanted to let you guys know that something the leadership team talked about tomorrow. Yesterday, we talked about it tomorrow. Yesterday was that we're going to do something of a deep dive on capital credits, the current state of play. And there's quite a lot of data to share. And that's something we're planning to do at the next board meeting.
Yeah, so we're going to take a deep dive on capital credits because there's so many questions. And I think there's so much assumptions that were made about retiring Tri-State's capital credits and LPEA's capital credits. Like, for example, we have not been retiring Tri-State capital credits in the history of LPEA up until 5 years ago. And I think there's been a lot of talk about how we've always retired Tri-State capital credits, and that is not true. So we're gonna do a deep dive with the board on all this information. So if you do have questions like that one, Kirsten, I think that's a great one. We will add that to the information packet.
All right, go ahead, Kirsten.
So Kohler, to get back to yours, I guess the alignment I was thinking of is the alignment of the tri-state portion of the retirement, that I would hope that we are retiring, if tri-state retires 2004 to us, that we turn around and retire 2004 to our members, as opposed to that we're retiring 2005 or 2006. I don't want to retire it until it's retired to us. The flip of that is because our members were part of that risk, I do think that the money that they retired to us, we need to go ahead and retire it to our members. But you can take that up in this meeting that you're having tomorrow or yesterday or whenever that is, Jessica and Carl. And one more question, if I may. Some of the tri-state co-ops use their allocations to help balance their books. So so they get pretty upset when there's not margins to help them. Do you know if any of them also are super dependent upon the retirement? And is that why I think you mentioned that like one co-op said, hey, we want to retire all 30 million. Is there a cash need for that at some of our smaller co-ops? Or, you know?
I believe so. I believe some of them, you know, that's pretty important for them to go forward. And I think the gentleman that put that forward is in one of those co-ops that retirement is pretty key for him. Yes. I don't know how many co-ops, and you in your email you mentioned, or you asked about the flavor of it and the temperature of it, and I really couldn't tell yet. But we won't know till next month. So Joe, I guess your hand is up. John, I don't know if you want me to call on him or you want to.
Yeah, you're doing good. Sorry, I was on. I'm good.
Right. Joe, go ahead.
The only crypto I understand is what I read in comic books when I was a kid and Superman. So with this, my understanding is this crypto uses just enormous amounts of power and is contributing to more greenhouse gases being emitted. If one of these outfits came into our service area, would we know that? And I mean, I would like to, I don't want them around here. But what would happen? I mean, can we deny them service if someone came in and said, gosh, you have cheap extra power, we're going to dig in here?
Yeah, so Joe, I dealt with this extensively in the Northwest because of cheap hydropower. The cryptocurrencies and the large data centers wanted to locate because the energy was so cheap. And you, as a utility, you can actually put a moratorium on them coming in until you create a new rate. And so that's what they did, is because what it does is it develops large swaths of land with minimal jobs. So there's like one person that staffs the data center. And so it's a real draw on that community, actually. In fact, if you want to Google it, Google Chelan County PUD, because they were kind of a lead on this in the US. Dan actually listened and was involved in the last cryptocurrency presentation. So I think the point being is that, you could put limitations on cryptocurrency coming in, and you would have to create a new rate tariff for them. That would be the key thing. So yes, you could put a moratorium until you created a rate tariff that was passed. Dan, do you have anything else to add on that one?
No,
yeah, and go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, I was about to say that's, basically what would happen. They would come knocking on our door for a new service. And Tiffany's used to hearing people, our engineering clerk, used to hearing people say, yeah, I want to connect a business and I want 100 kilowatts. If somebody comes up and says, I want 100,000 kilowatts, it's a different story. And so then that kicks over to engineering. We start asking more questions. We find things out. We did have one come knocking on our door about a year ago. And it was sort of ridiculous. They said, yeah, we want to connect to you guys, and we want 100 megawatts, and we want free power, is essentially what it came down to. And it just wasn't going anywhere when we started saying, no, we're not going to build something for nothing. They disappeared. So
So is that seems that crypto thing is growing? Is that true?
Yeah, but it's going to be, and as I said in this presentation, it's growing in areas where one, land is cheap and they can get land pretty inexpensively, and two, where rates are particularly inexpensive as well. And so, we don't really have the cheap land here, but Tri-State's coming up with some interesting ways to possibly capture some, utilize some stranded assets maybe to provide for some of these loads.
Okay, thanks.
Great. Thanks.
And I think, Joe, you asked if it was growing. It's my understanding that China is basically kicking them out, and they're coming here to build these units. So it is growing. Tim, go ahead.
Thanks, Kohler. I sure appreciate the info that you always bring back. I think it's page 112, September 2021 financial performance, second bullet, says non-member sales were like 180% above budget. And I'm curious, do you have insight into what those rates are? I mean, primarily in the past, most of the sales from Tri-State were to its members, and outside sales were marginal. They participated in some markets there, it seemed to me anyway. And now the last few reports, last year or so, maybe even since COVID, they're just kind of building this outside the member kind of growth in non-member sales. And I'm just wondering if our member rates and payments are subsidizing perhaps people who aren't members. Do you have any insight into that?
I don't have insight on subsidizing it, but I will say that the last couple months that Tri-State has actually had profitable months, it's because of this non-member sale, because our member sales are down, non-member is up. And the price, and I think, and I'll have to dig through the presentations and some of that data that I shared with you. I believe it's in there, but I gotta dig in there to find where you can see where some of this pricing is and how much they're selling and if it was up or down. But the prices are extremely favorable. And I believe to a certain point that actually that's subsidizing us instead of us subsidizing them. Because if they've got this extra generation and they can open it up and the price, I know last month, I think some of it was hitting up $250 a megawatt hour. I could be wrong on that, but I think that's where it was. But and their future pricing is extremely strong. So I kind of look at it as kind of somewhat subsidizing us. It helps us with getting more money in the pot. But I'll dig and see if I can't find that detail for you so you can see it for yourself.
Yeah, I dug a little bit and didn't really get an insight. So if you have anything, I'd just be curious to, what are the prices on average that they're getting through the course of a month or a year or something versus what we are. I mean, if those outside sales are managing to keep our rates low or help the finances of Tri-State, as our member sales decline, I probably won't make much of an issue out of that. So let's see. The other one was the next page after that, and the proposed budget presented to the board, the last bullet point talks again about member and non-member sales. And it allows in Tri-State to defer revenue to support rate stabilization, right? And I mean, if sales are down in 2021, why would you defer revenue into the next year?
Well, they aren't deferring it in 2021, it's just the opposite. We're actually using some of that deferred income to make sure that we stay within our covenants. So, and it's to the tune this year, it's going to be, if I remember right, around $80 million of deferred income that Tri-State has put back in to the financials to show that we've used up. But next, starting in 2022, they think they're going to turn around the margins to where they'll have excess margins, and then they can start building back up that deferred income. So not right now, because right now we're using it, not building it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's hopeful. And yeah, I was thinking more along the 2022 budget, which is what that was. And also wondering if the potential receipt of any partial contract money, was that ever discussed? And maybe that they're not anticipating that in 2022. How would they treat that payment?
No, I don't.
Buy down
think
payment.
that was discussed at all.
Okay.
It's mentioned once in a while, but not with detail and not with, nothing solid. So I would say no, it hasn't been talked about.
All right. Thank you very much.
Kirsten?
Yeah, Tim, it seems like that came up as far as where does that money go? Because I think for both DMEA and Kit Carson, that money might have been put in the rate stabilization fund, the deferred revenue, whereas some folks were asking, hey, why don't we do it to pay off our debt on some of these assets that need to go away in order for us to get rid of them. So I think that's a really good question and one that we need to see where Tri-State does put these funds, because I would think we would want them to put it more towards buying down the debt to make them more easy to meet their goals as far as getting rid of their assets. That's a thought. The question, had so many good things you said. It was about the money, the non-member money. So there's three pools that comes from. There's the excess generation, which is not used very much, that we're making too much power and we need to get the heck rid of it. There's the spot market, which is where we sell things like at $250, which is fabulous, and that can happen if there's something bad going on in California. That can happen if there's something bad going on in Texas or whatever. Tri-State makes a lot of money on that. And then the third one is contracts that we have. And for instance, there's one with WAPA that says, okay, if WAPA is not able to generate enough electricity because of the rivers being too low, then Tri-State, you need to come up and make up that for us, and we're going to pay you X amount. And that's advantageous to Tri-State and to its members' rate. So those kinds of contracts. We also have I'm still thinking I'm on that board in Kohler. I know I'm not. Some of those other contracts are with companies that are just saying, well, just in case I need this, I'm willing to pay you more for this in the future. So those futures contracts can be very lucrative too. A 200% increase on something that's not huge, a huge amount of our sales may sound better than it is, although to Kohler's point, it's better enough to make the difference between a positive and a negative year for Tri-State. Kohler, did I miss anything on that one?
No, I think that's good.
Okay. Cool.
All right,
Ted?
Yeah, just quickly, a couple of pretty cool positive things that I pulled out of the board report that Kohler gave us. I mean, there were a few things where some energy prices are going up and coal is supply chain issues, but there's a cool offset in there that it looks like they just commissioned that the Niall wind energy plant, 200 megawatts. So that's a really cool step in the right direction and should actually have a positive impact. I mean, certainly it's good for the renewable energy scene, but it also should be good, I think, for Tri-State's energy availability. And then the other one I wanted to point out was in Dwayne's part of that report, he did specifically thank LPEA for our invitation to Pat Bridges to our town hall meetings and comment on the collaborative nature of that. So I think that's super nice to see, Dwayne stepping forward and commenting on that. So that's all I had. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Ted. Okay, last call for Kohler. Okay, thanks very much. Pushing on to fast track.
My turn already. All right. So you have the report. Hopefully I'll get a chance to read it. There's a few things I want to point out and a question I want to ask. First, we had the annual meeting, annual shareholder meeting took place just prior to the board meeting. And I'm not sure that I got out the information to everybody. I know it was in my report, the date and so forth of it, the time, but I'm not sure if the actual annual meeting Zoom link was provided to everybody. And if you didn't get that and wanted to go, I apologize. Also, there was a presentation, an annual sort of report that Kelly put together that I attached to this report to all of you. Some really good, very helpful information within that. I hope all of you, if you didn't already take the time or have the opportunity to read through it, to do so. And please reach out to me or even perhaps Ted, even if you want, Ted, to have any kind of questions answered around that. There's some good information, and it is very helpful. So really want to stress that. The same slate of directors was re-elected by the two shareholders, and the meeting went fairly well. It was over in less than an hour. One of the things that the Fast Track Board discussed after that was sort of the timing of the annual shareholder meeting. Under the current bylaws of Fast Track, it's supposed to occur in April of each year, unless the board of Fast Track sees a need for a change to that, in which case they would ask for that permission from the two shareholders. And that's happened a couple times in the last couple of years, some of it due to COVID. But several directors kind of asked the question of the sentiment of the LPEA board with regards to, a spring meeting is sort of reviewing the results from the previous year, right? Sort of like a performance review and so forth, and then any other business that might come up. Whereas something in the fall might be something which is more strategic, focused on strategically, where does Fast Track intend to go on a strategic level, and how is there the resources being allocated to do so? And so there was this question about, does this board have a preference about whether they would like to participate in an annual meeting that's maybe more backward versus forward looking? And so I said I can't answer for this board, but I would bring that question here. I put it in the report. So if there is any kind of preference that anyone has or thoughts, I'd love to hear them now. And then I can report that back to the Fast Track board. Rachel, looks like you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was thinking a little bit about this and just trying to remember if some of the challenges we've run into in the past. And has there ever been, aren't there sometimes glitches between, this doesn't seem right, but our annual meeting and their annual meeting, or something about electing the slate of directors and it doesn't sync up with our election schedule? Is that accurate? And if so, do either of these options help clear that up?
Yeah, it's a good question. So there's two things going on. One is when do the shareholders the co-ops appoint their representative on the board, right? And we've typically done that at the first board meeting after our annual meeting, right? And ours has moved around a little bit last couple of years. And there have been these cases where they appointed, LPA appointed someone prior to our annual meeting who was then not reelected. And so now they're on the fast track board, but they're no longer on the LPA board. So, and that actually happened when I was elected. And so they had just appointed Karen, and the LPA board did. And then like a month later, I was elected and appointed to the fast track board. So she remained on that board, but she doesn't represent LPA. So that timing isn't really dependent upon the annual shareholder meeting. That's really dependent upon what is the timing of the elections of the respective shareholders, their co-op, and how they go about appointing their representative to the fast track board, right? We, in this case, for example, this year at the annual shareholder meeting, I was not the voting proxy for LPA. That was Kirsten, and that is a separate appointment. So it doesn't really affect the shareholder meeting per se, that timing of who gets appointed the LPA board representative. Does that help, or did I just confuse the heck out of you?
No, I think that helps. Thank you. And then I don't then have a strong inclination one way or the other on timing. But I did just want to give the feedback that I loved that the annual report was in here. It really helped clarify, I think, a bit more about what Fast Track is doing. So just thinking about next time we onboard new directors, that would be a really good resource to share with them.
That's a great idea. Thanks. Kirsten?
Yeah, to answer your question, I think a spring meeting where it's a retrospect of the last year is more in line with what I think of most annual meetings are. I appreciate the concept of having the strategic stuff, but I would leave that more to the Roundup board as opposed to the Fast Track board as opposed to the voting members. I would go for a spring myself. Anybody else? Spring? Just trying to give them some feedback. Spring, Kohler, Joe. Seen a couple there for you, Tim.
Great, thank you. Anyone disagree with that? All right, well, that's very helpful. I'll be able to report that back. One other thing that was in the report that I don't know if people had a chance to go to that form, but as we all know, there's a lot of different kinds of funding for broadband. It's supposedly imminently on its way here. And one of them is $170 million that will be allocated out throughout Colorado. It's already been allocated to Colorado, and the Colorado Broadband Advisory Board is asking the input on how or where that should be spent. And there was a survey link there. And I encourage.
It's broken, Tim, or they closed it.
Oh, they did? All right, well, forget that then. So I filled it out a while back. I didn't realize it already closed up. So any other questions? Anybody else? All right, thanks very much.
In fact, John Lee had a question.
You had a.
So was that new business? We were doing a poll or voting on, it wasn't just part of the report, was it?
Yes. I put it in the report. I said I will poll the LPA board during my FTC report at the board meeting. And I don't think it was a motion or anything. I'm just trying to get a sentiment.
All right.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I thought if it was something we were going to take action on, it would be in new business or things for us to, a consent board item, not a report.
I'll defer to Graham on that one.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, my understanding was that Tim had indicated to Fast Track that he would just sort of get a general sense of what the board members' thoughts are on the timing of this annual meeting and report that back to Fast Track just in the terms of a report rather than a specific corporate action. So we come back and say, seems like, a decent percentage of LPEA board members think it's reasonable for this to be a spring meeting because that's about when annual reports are typically ready. But I think if anybody would want to take a specific action to give Tim direction to go back to Fast Track with specific marching orders to sort of instruct him to go, inform them of something specific, that would be a possible corporate action. But it seemed to me that this was more of just information gathering on Tim's part.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Tim. Appreciate that. CREA, bringing it on home.
All right, great. So to kind of augment Rachel's question about the legislative cycle that's going on, they're all jockeying into position right now. The 73rd General Assembly convenes on January 12th, 2022. It lasts 120 days at that point. So right now, each legislator is submitting their proposed bills for the upcoming season. They have to submit 3 by December 1st and 2 by January 1st. They get 5 total. Every single one of them will get at least 1 committee hearing over the course of that 120 days starting in January. I would love to have any feedback from any of you guys if you have any specific thoughts or ideas on any of the email. I just did see that my email did make it to you regarding the infrastructure package that just passed and the Polis's proposal for air quality package coming up. It's got a price tag of $424 million, and it, quite honestly, quite a few of them would correspond to rural electric cooperative industry. Let me see. It seems like I had another thought for you, but it escaped me. So does anybody have any specific questions for me?
Was there a written report for this?
No, sir, there was not, because we did not have a meeting.
Oh, okay, great.
So thank you for that. That was my next point. I do have the next meeting is coming up on the 2nd and 3rd of December. And the 2nd will be a joint managers / CREA board meeting, which I've never attended one of these. So that's going to be new. That's coming up here pretty quickly. So, I had thought about perhaps the opening piece of the agenda for that managers meeting is what keeps you up at night. So they were trying to solicit, things that were important to, the board members to be able to better inform, going forward if we have to make decisions. For instance, I asked about microgrid, more information about microgrids. I would have loved to have asked about the Bitcoin thing, Kohler, if I would have thought of that at the time, because I don't understand it almost at all, except that it uses a lot of power. I am still a little bit confused as to what the difference is between the microgrid for instance, Red Feather Lakes and Basalt's load shaving project. So the nuances escape me a little bit. So that's what I asked to be informed about specifically. Yeah, there's no other updates beyond the one that I gave you at this point. Oh, and I did want to make sure, and John Lee, this is just an informational gathering as well, kind of in the same spirit as Tim's question about the fast track meeting. I'm going to continue sending those CREA news clippings. I don't know if you guys like to get them or not, but I think that a lot of times they're real helpful. And like somebody, I think it was Joe, pointed out, we don't get them from Jeannie Bennett anymore. So
I really like those clippings. So please keep sending.
okay, thank you for that.
Yeah, I really like them too. And Holly, I really appreciate that you also point out a few things in them, because there's sometimes that, you know, if you have to choose what you have to read, if somebody has personally pointed something out, then it gets read by me more often than not.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, I do. You know, sometimes some things do definitely pique my interest more than others. And I try to keep that bias out of it, but thank you for that feedback. All right, does anybody else have any big burning legislative or safety questions or anything for CREA? Hearing none. If you come up with anything or you read that email that I passed on about the jockeying for the infrastructure and all that, please let me know and I'll be happy to answer it to the best of my ability.
Great, thank you.
And one last thing, I really do appreciate this opportunity that you all have given me to represent at CREA. I definitely learn something every single time I go up there, and I really love that. So thank you so much.
Terrific. Okay, Western United.
Holly, we appreciate your work too up there. We chose well. Thank you so much. So Western United did not have a meeting this month. Jack Johnstone, who had been the Western United secretary and a board member, now is no longer the CEO at Southeastern. He's got health issues in his family, so he has stepped off that board, and we've lost him totally, actually, from the co-op family at this point. So I think Jessica will agree with me, because I know you've worked with him as another CEO, that I think it's a loss to the Colorado co-op community.
Yeah, huge loss.
And I wish him well. Our next meeting will be in January, so next month's report should be just as short as this.
Yeah, you say that. Okay. That is it for the agenda. So absent any other final comments from the team.
I'm voting for snow for no other reason. We need to give Carl a real Colorado welcome, and we
Finally.
just haven't had.
It's about time. Get him some snow. All right. Well, again, thank you all for your work. This was a good meeting. We got a lot done, and I really appreciate everybody's continued contribution and engagement. Oh, Dan.
I just want to say, go Team Canham.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Happy Thanksgiving. Ted.
Gobble, gobble, gobble.
Gobble, gobble. Thank you to our to any and everyone who hung in there for most or all of the meeting, and special thanks to my dad, Tom Compton, who's on the attendees list right now.
Nice. Hi, Dad.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Well, wait,
right.
one more thing. We forgot to mention Veterans Day, so I wanted to thank John Lee for his service and Kirsten as well. And if I've missed
And you,
anybody
Jessica,
else,
for your service as well.
thank you. Anyone else who served in the military, thank you for your service. So
Thank you.
Here, here. Thanks.
You're here. Okay.
Happy Thanksgiving. Be safe.
Happy Thanksgiving. This meeting is adjourned. You guys have a good day.
Take care, everyone.
See you online.
Thanks.
Yep.
Wolf.